Scott? You probably know.
About 6.
6 years. Wow. Okay. So time to change in the last 6 years. We're going to get into our techniques, but we're also going to get into a little bit on risk assessments, social media. Those things have a huge impact on our jobs. We're lucky enough to have Ron Arthur here today, the Senior Claims Manager for ACIG. Been with ACIG for
25 years.
25 years. I think it started about 30 years ago.
I think I came when they were 8 years old.
Oh, wow. There you go.
Because I was only 10, so you know.
Yeah. So I want to have Ron take the floor. In the end, we'll cover some things that are really Kitchell specific, so that'll touch you guys and help you progress in your career. So, Ron, take it away.
Okay. First off, you know, it's kind of like a Baptist church here. Why don't we bring everybody forward? And because there'll be some opportunities for some interaction, and with Joanne back in the back, she can't interact with Grace up here. So let's just pull everybody forward if we could. Make it a little tighter here. But, you know, when I pulled into your parking lot this morning, I noticed 2 interesting banners that y'all had posted. And one says, Kitchell, Phoenix Business Journal, ranked #1 general contractor. And then the next one, Kitchell, ERN, Southwest Magazine, Contractor of the Year. Are y'all proud of that?
Oh, yeah.
Well, you should be proud of that. But the reason I took that picture and read that to you guys is if we end up in litigation, if we end up in courtroom, if we end up in front of a jury, you can bank on the fact that the other side going to plaster those signs on a big banner, on a big screen in the courtroom and say, these are the guys. Look what they say about themselves. But whatever that issue may be that we're in court, they say, these are the guys who say they're #1, they say they're quality builders, they say, but look what happened over here. Now, good news is we haven't had those kind of problems. And in my 25 years at ACIG, I have dealt with the Kitchell account for probably about 20 of those. And so I can truthfully say, looking back in terms of the number of claims we've had, looking at what we have on the books today, we don't have too many claims, which is a good thing. And as general builders, I'd like to suggest that whatever you guys are doing, obviously, 1, keep doing it. Number 2, any opportunity that you have to deal with your partners in the ACIG program, let's keep that going, keep sharing with them these good things that you're doing. Because getting recognition like that, you know, from your community, from your peers in the industry, good things. And that's what we like. Now, when you look at for those of you, well, let's back up. I know Joanne, I know Joan, Josh, I mean, y'all are familiar, Grace, y'all are familiar with the ACIG program. You've got a pretty good feel as to what ACIG and what that means. For the rest of you, a couple of things here for today. 1, this is not designed to make you experts at investigating accidents and claims. Number 1, you don't have enough of them, so we don't want you to become experts in that area. Yeah. Number 2, I'm not here to try to teach you insurance 101. You need to have just a general understanding of what happens in the ACIG program, an understanding of why Kitchell's in this program, and an understanding of the relationship, the partnership that's out there with the contractors in the ACIG program. When I joined ACIG in 1989, we had 11 contractors. In 1989, we had a stated cap of 18 contractors. Here in 2014, we just added our 41st contractor as of October 1. We don't have a desire to have 45 contractors. When I saw the email that 41 was coming in back in the spring, I called Mike O'Neill, our CEO, and said, Mike, I thought our cap was 40. And he said, well, it is. But the executive committee told me to manage to 40. So managing to 40 means if we got a hot candidate out there at number 41, we bring them in with the expectation in the next 18, 24, 30 months, somebody may leave, we'll still be at 40. So again, we actually met with this new member a couple of weeks ago. They're out of Denver, Saunders Construction. Y'all may be familiar with them. They actually do a little work in Arizona. But the question from Saunders was, you know, are you going to add the additional contractors? Are we going to grow? And the response was, yeah, we're going to grow, but we're not going to grow necessarily by adding more members. Again, to go to 42, to go to 45, whatever the number may be out there, there's a cost factor. What we look at with 40 contractors, there's a claims consultant, there's a risk management executive, there's a safety consultant. So there's the team dealing with the contractor. We believe that at 40 contractors, 10 accounts, plus we have some runoff stuff over the years, obviously, that's a good workload. If you go to 42, 43, 44, now you're stretching that team maybe to a point that we can't be as effective for the contractors. And if we need to add another service team, just the overhead cost of the service team is significant. And if you add a service team, well, then you got all the other related support people and everything else that goes with it. So our head count today for ACIG is about 72. And of that 72, everybody is in, well, now Richardson, Texas, right outside of Dallas. And with the exception of, we have our own workers' compensation adjuster in Southern California. She actually handles the Kitchell account. We have remote safety guys in Des Moines, Iowa, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and Houston, Texas. Outside of that, everybody else is right there in Richardson. And a benefit to being in Richardson, Texas, to be in Dallas, is our ability to get wherever we need to be within minutes. I mean, with DFW Airport, that we can go virtually any place in a matter of hours. Customarily, if we need to be somewhere that day, we can get there. And for those of you who are familiar with Southwest Airlines, and probably out of Phoenix, you fly on Southwest Airlines, next weekend, a major event's happening in the Dallas area. What's been known as the Wright Amendment for the last 35 years is disappearing. So starting next weekend, Southwest Airlines can fly from Dallas anywhere they want to fly direct. You know, prior to this, to get from Dallas to Phoenix even, we had to go either to Houston or to San Antonio or maybe Albuquerque and then to Phoenix. To get to the West Coast, you might stop 2 or 3 times. Now they can actually fly direct. So that's another benefit of being in Dallas. Southwest is going to be able to get us places we need to go, probably at a better rate than what we paid to American or USA Air or whomever. So, but at any rate, that's what we have going on in Dallas right now. Not working. Josh.
Just click on the main monitor, Josh.
On the what?
Click on the main monitor with the mouse. Okay, now try the clicker.
Ah, there we go. Okay. And also, if y'all bear with me today, this cold or allergies or whatever, I've been going coast to coast for the last 45 days. So it's the weather in Seattle, the weather in New York, the weather in San Diego, and get home tonight. And we fly to Charlotte, North Carolina in the morning. So I'm not sure when this coast to coast stuff is going to stop. The ACIG mission statement, saving lives. I mean, we put that right up front. That's our goal for you guys. We want to save lives out there. Not only lives of your personnel, but if you got subcontractors on the job as well. We want to save lives out there. Prevent injuries. And injuries includes bodily injury as well as property damage issues out there. And reduce the overall cost of risk. There's a cost for you guys being in the ACIG program. There's a cost when something happens out there. In today's, the current policy today for Kitchell, if you make a mistake out there and we injure somebody or we do some property damage, the first $280,000 is your money. That's on the loss side. If we have to hire attorneys, experts, other people to help investigate and handle the claim, you've got the first $280,000 there as well. So you think about that, there's $560,000 that can go wrong. It's coming directly out of Kitchell's coffers. So for your personnel in the field, if they decide to cut a corner, and we're going to talk about some issues throughout the day here where corners are cut, not for you guys, but just to give you an idea of what can go on out there, you're making $500,000 decisions. So do you want to go in at some point and sit down with Jim Swanson and others and explain why you did what you did and the fact of what it's going to cost you directly as a company? Now, beyond that $280,000 on loss and $280,000 on expense, we currently cover the first $5 million in damages for any kind of claim out there as the ACIG group. So you get above your $280,000, and you and your partners take the next sum up to $5 million. It's a lot of money. And unfortunately, in today's market, a $5 million claim isn't as difficult to get to as what it was even 5 to 10 years ago. So again, juries are coming back with huge numbers. And so we need to recognize that if the best thing for us from an accident standpoint is never to have the event. If it never happens, we don't have to have meetings like this. We don't have to have training. We don't have to go in and shut things down, investigate, figure out what happened. My job, unfortunately, as a claims consultant, and in addition to doing this now for 25 years at ACIG, I also did it 16 years ahead of that with Travelers Insurance Company. So I've been doing this for far too long. But my job is to go in when something bad goes wrong, and we'll talk about some of these incidents. When I go in and meet your field personnel in the job site trailer, and if they've already brought in senior management from the corporate offices, things like that, my job up front is to go in with these wide-eyed individuals who are thinking, what the hell happened? And try to determine what did happen. But more importantly, my job, and it sounds ghoulish sometimes, my job is to put a dollar value on it. You know, somebody's been seriously injured. Somebody's been killed. What's the dollar value? What's it going to cost us, whether we're paying it immediately now or too many of these cases are 3 to 5 years into the future? So my job is to go in and try to come up with a valuation and put this together so that we can go back and talk to the Jim Swansons of the world and say, okay, this is what's going to cost you, this is what's going to cost the ACIG program as a whole. And of course, when we get into these kinds of losses, the next thing that happens to Kitchell or other contractors, yeah, you've got this immediate impact financially, but then looking forward, it's going to equate higher premiums. I mean, you're going to pay for it now and you're going to pay for it in the future. Just like if you go out tonight and roll through a stoplight and broadside or get broadsided by an oncoming vehicle, do you think Allstate just goes, hey, no problem, you know, we understand and we'll take care of these damages. And you paid us our premium and that's our job, we're going to come in and take care of it. But somewhere along the way, Allstate's going to raise those rates to you in the future. In spite of what you see in their ads on TV with Allstate, it's going to be all accident forgiveness, don't bank on it. You're going to pay for it at some point in the future, okay? As far as the claims operation in Dallas, that's our claim service team. Like I said, we have 3 other consultants reporting directly to me. We report straight to the CEO. Unlike most insurance claims operations, we're not the redheaded stepchildren there in the business. They understand what we can do to support and take care of the company. They know what we can do if we don't manage the claims properly and what that can cost the company as a whole. So we've got a great deal of experience between the 3 consultants and myself. We've got the contractors pretty equally divided amongst us. You know, the current 41 contractors in almost an even division, and we go wherever the contractor is, that's where we go. Years ago, we tried to do some regionalized type allocation. So we had a West Coast guy, we had a Midwest guy, we had an East Coast guy. So if the contractor was based in Chicago, but they had something going on the West Coast, there might be 2 different consultants dealing with that contractor. We realized quickly that that wasn't working, that there had to be a relationship built between the consultant and the contractor. So now there are times that all 3 or 4 of us may show up in Chicago at the same time because we each have different accounts in Chicago. Same thing with the West Coast and things like that. So we have the consultant staff that's one-on-one with the contractors. We have our liability senior claim representatives in-house at ACIG. And then on the workers' compensation side, currently I'm dealing with 10 different third-party administrators. So unlike us following you around the country when something happens, depending on where Kitchell is, there may be a different workers' compensation adjuster if we're talking about injuries to our own people. So again, when I add the compensation people to my staff down there, it's adding about another 25 people all in all. But that's the claim staff that we deal with at ACIG. Today we're going to talk about if you've had an accident, what happens next, okay? We're going to talk about SWAT, and that's our accident investigation program when there's a catastrophic type event. We've got a list of 10 different accident types that you need to familiarize yourself with, and that initiates making a phone call. We're talking about investigative goals and objectives. Talk about investigation toolkit, some things that you probably need to gather up and have available when something goes wrong, when something happens. Hopefully you never need it, but it's like a safety manual. Where is it? How can you get to it? Who knows where it is? Who knows what's there? Pre-planning. You need to pre-plan for investigations and accidents just like you pre-plan the work that you're doing out there. When something goes wrong, if you've got this Chinese fire drill of who's going to do what, and something is basic, who's going to call 911? I mean, it's a very basic issue, but if you haven't made that decision early on, you may have a delay getting emergency personnel to the site. And then we're going to talk about actually performing an investigation. And again, there'll be an opportunity here today to do some interaction amongst yourselves on some of these issues. Okay, something happens. Who's going to gather the facts? You know, think in terms of you guys specifically, or certainly your people on site, you're there when it happened. There are things that can happen within the first hour following an accident, things that happen within the first day, and certainly when you get into the next day, things start changing. You know, you have an accident, depending on the severity, do you need to shut your job down? If you shut it down, is it a matter of shutting it down for a matter of hours while the EMS does their thing? Is it a matter of shutting it down for a day or longer if OSHA's coming in, if you've got other investigative agencies coming in? So again, who's going to gather the facts from y'all's standpoint? I mean, your people on site need to know basically what to start putting their hands on, protecting, preserving, while they've made the necessary phone calls. Maybe Josh gets the first phone call, and then Josh takes it from there, and he's calling if we need to get an attorney involved, ACIG involved, whatever. What do we need to do there? But again, whoever's on site needs to start looking at pulling things together, securing things. Again, that first call to 911. Make that call and then protect and preserve the scene after that. It may not be the same person gathering the facts as to who's going to be responsible for the injury, the scene, and what's going on there. You know, in most cases, you're going to have multiple people from Kitchell at any given site. I mean, obviously, the first thing's going to be, you've got a trailer out there probably with Kitchell's name on it. Who's in that trailer? What's their responsibility? What's their obligation? How do we get to those people quickly? Again, if you've already had some of these discussions, even before you put the first shovel in the ground, you've got these things in place. One thing I encourage people on, depending on the severity of the accident, somebody who needs to be trained within each contracting organization is the receptionist at the corporate office. It's amazing with social media today how quickly things spread between, you know, your people or other people on their cell phones taking photographs, sending texts, sending emails, alerting the media, whoever they might want to holler at. But again, as soon as some of this stuff hits the media, and if it's a significant issue, someone's going to call the corporate office. And so that receptionist needs to be trained from the standpoint of, you know, whatever their normal procedure would be on the phone, but more importantly, who does he or she go to internally to shift that call? The last thing you want from a receptionist, oh my God, it happened again. Think of how that would play in the media. So again, have that discussion, make a decision after we get out of here today. who are the receptionists, not only here in the corporate office, but again, if you've got a primary telephone link into the office trailer, who's going to answer the phone? What's going to be their immediate response? Something we need to talk about. And again, the training and preparation for these people. Again, we look at it, and when we have a meeting like this today, one of the issues here today is for you guys to go back to your people in the field. Say, hey, I sat through this today. I spent a lot of time, and this guy from Dallas, he just really ripped us a new one today. But again, your job is to go back to your people in the field and say, hey, this is an important issue. And something that, one, we haven't seen a lot of, but at the same time, something we need to be prepared to handle. Too often, we find very quickly after an accident, a matter of seconds might have made the big difference in it happening or not happening. And someone just not taking that extra few seconds or time to plan a little bit more, just to step back and look at it one more time before they step up and do something. And again, we've got some examples. It's one thing about a claims person. We have the stories. We can sit here and fortunately we'll get all this done well before lunch, but we've got stories that can curl your hair, and we've got stories as claims people. Again, we're kind of ghoulish when we get together, but some of this too, it's not that we're making light of the situation with what we do as a living. It's kind of a release, an opportunity just to get a few things off your chest as well. So, but we do have the stories. And hey, throughout today, if you got a question, you guys remotely, I'm sure there's a way for you to shout in as well. But if you got a question, let me know, raise your hand. We'll be more than happy to address those issues as we move forward through today. You know, we need to talk about the culture of the company. And maybe this goes back to the culture of you guys individually. You look at the project that you may be doing. We've got some culture issues with different owners that we work with. And so their project or the owners themselves. We had a case in Chicago. I think they were working on a Catholic hospital. And, you know, you can imagine working with the Catholic diocese and some of the rigid issues they've got and stuff like that. Well, there were some issues of T-shirts that some of our people were wearing on the job site that offended the Catholic diocese. So because of that culture issue, there had to be that meeting, that discussion. And, you know, you get in with union laborers and stuff like that, that's a whole new set of problems. But guys, you can't wear those shirts. You know, you got to put on either just a plain T-shirt or, you know, you got to cover up. I mean, you may think this is funny on Friday night or Saturday night having a beer with the boys and stuff like that. But when you step on the job site, culture issues, that's kind of a new thing, probably the last 5 to 10 years at least, smoking issues. You're in a non-smoking environment, not only inside where you're working, but even inside the fence. If that's a culture issue with the client or the owner, guess what? You need to enforce those issues with your personnel. Looking around the room, there's enough gray hair here to know that some of you guys have been doing this, like me, far too long. But you can think back 15, 20 years ago, the typical deal at lunchtime, guys would take their lunch and go across the street to grab a beer, grab 2 beers, and come back and start working in the afternoon. Culture today, you don't do that. We've got a contractor in the Chicago area that even as far as their executive level personnel, if they happen to go to lunch with a client, have a drink, guess what? They go home. They don't come back to the office. That's the culture. So again, knowing what the culture issues are with your project, with your client, you need to abide by that and live with that. And it can be, again, a dicey discussion with your people, but it is something that needs to be done. Again, the severity of the incident, we're going to talk about some examples here in a minute. Is it a SWAT or not? SWAT investigation brings things to a whole new level. And we've got a lot of processes and procedures in place to identify and work with that. If we're talking about a SWAT type claim, sort of plant these things in the back of your mind. I think if you look at this, fatal injuries, brain injuries, paralysis, amputation, blindness, partial blindness, severe burns, heart attack, stroke, severe bodily injury, and worries, anything else that might happen out there from an injury standpoint that seems significant, pollution discharges, and extensive property damage and business interruption. I will submit to you, we have had something happen in each one of these categories. And unfortunately, we've had things happen in these categories far often than we would like. Now, some issues to talk about: amputations. From a SWAT standpoint, I'm not talking about a fingertip. That is an amputation, and we'll code it as an amputation. But if somebody's just lost a fingertip or even the first joint, we're not going to be overly concerned of that being a SWAT type investigation. We're not going to unleash all of the resources we have because of that. At the same time, heart attack and stroke, in most jurisdictions, heart attacks and strokes are not compensable injuries. And unfortunately, we've had a lot of our people die as a result of a heart attack or stroke. And in many, many cases, we go back and you're looking at health issues. Unfortunately, we've got guys out there working on our projects that weigh 200, 300, and 400 pounds, and they're subject to heart attacks and strokes. And you get down to the question of, one, were they doing anything unusual at the time they had the heart attack or stroke? Or were they working in unusually hot or humid conditions? Had they just climbed a ladder to get on a rooftop to do whatever, and it's hot and humid, and that excess exertion getting up on the rooftop, which is not something they did every day, and was out of the ordinary for their job? Those kinds of issues can get us into a compensable claim. If you're in New York, fortunately you guys don't work in New York, I don't think you have any desire to go to New York. But if you're in New York, there is a presumption, if it happens during the workday, if it happens on the job, and the guy is either severely impaired as a result of heart attack or stroke, or he dies as a result of heart attack or stroke, irregardless of what his prior medical issues may have been, it's compensable. But that's New York. And you run into similar issues in New York as it relates to other accidents and injuries, where they're very liberal in terms of what they interpret in favor of the claimant or the injured employee.
Hey Ron, why don't you tell everybody what SWAT stands for? Some people might not know the acronym.
A Special Well-Timed Accident Investigation Team. And we'll get into some of the more specifics as to SWAT here in a moment. When you're looking at investigating an accident, a lot depends on who's involved. You know, I mentioned unions earlier, and y'all do union work. Do y'all do non-union work too, Josh, or not? You know, in the union environment, things are a little bit different than they are in the non-union environment. And so as soon as you get an accident out there involving union personnel, many, many times, whatever unions involved, whatever business agents may be involved, they want to get involved themselves, as much for protecting their backsides as opposed to assisting us in finding out what went on. So that can be a challenge depending on who's involved. Legal issues, obviously. Again, what happens in Arizona versus what happens in New York, what happens in Florida versus what happens in California. You've got different legal issues, whether it be workers' compensation or liability exposures. So we have to be familiar with what those legal issues are. You guys don't need to be overly concerned on the legal issues, because that's one why you have Dave Koval internally here at Kitchell as your general counsel. You've got ACIG. We've got all the legal resources at our disposal outside both companies. So we will deal with the legal issues when they come up. We will advise you early on as to if there's questions or concerns about what we do or should do. Again, the gathering of information throughout the entire process, from the time it happens to the time we conclude a claim, whether it be a matter of months, years, or whatever, it's constant gathering of information. Even if we're looking at litigating a case, we're still gathering information the day before that case goes in front of the jury. So it's an ongoing issue there from that standpoint. Protecting the scene. When something happens on your job, one, you make the necessary phone calls, 911 or otherwise. You get the appropriate EMS personnel, fire, police, whatever involved. I mean, they come to the scene, they do their thing on the scene. Media today is a fact of life. And again, you don't necessarily have the control that we had several years ago inside the fence at our projects. You may have a degree of control as it relates to your own personnel. Josh, is there any kind of a cell phone policy at Kitchell? Is there anything that restricts cell phone usage on the site as far as laboring type people versus supervisory people? I mean, are phones just accessible and available once they step on the site?
Well, our policy is only like foremen are supposed to use phones. Can't use them when they're operating. And obviously we can't use them when we operate our vehicles.
Okay, so I guess my question would be this. Kitchell's policy is foremen and above are the only people that should have a phone out there on the site. Do we have any way of monitoring whether or not Joe Smith over here working on a ditch doesn't have a phone in his back pocket or in his tool bucket or something like that?
No.
Okay. So that said, even though we've got this pretty stringent policy, if Joe's got his phone over there and something's happened, I mean, how many times have you turned on the 10 o'clock news and what's the first confirmation of a fire or an accident or whatever? Well, it's people standing around videotaping with their phones, and they, shared that with the media. Because guess what? They're there when it happened, and the media is at least 15 minutes away before they get there. So they like to get their hands on that kind of stuff. So again, something significant happens on your project, you've got people out there with their phones videotaping still shots and whatever, and they're sharing it with the media. Very recently, we had a significant case outside of Albany, New York, and what showed up on the front page of the Jonestown Ledger was a photograph of the owner's facility, big name of the owner in the background, but right up front, about this tall, was a sign with our contractor's name. Now, it's our project, yeah, it's the owner's facility, but the accident involved a subcontractor. Now, whether the media took that shot or whether somebody took that shot and showed it, gave it to the media, when I got there the next day, our little sign was gone. But it was on the front page of the newspaper. So somebody that quickly laid their hands on that sign, and that's what made the media. And we will see that same picture over the next couple of years as this claim moves through the legal process. So again, that information is going to get out, and there's not a lot we can do to control it. However, we do not have to allow the media on our sites. Now, helicopters, telephoto lenses, everything else, they can shoot pictures from a long distance out, but we do not have to allow them through the gates of our site. So when something significant happens, getting our gates closed and keeping the media out, letting EMS and others in, letting OSHA in, whatever the case may be, we don't have to let those reporters in the site. Not only do we not have to let them into the site, I mean, their getting on our site is a problem because of the potential of injury or accident to them once they're on site. So again, we can keep them out legitimately. We don't need to get confrontational with them, we just shut the gates. And something we will talk about here in a little bit talks about how to deal with the media, and you guys, other than making the phone call to the corporate office, getting the corporate people involved, you guys should not have to be dealing with the media directly. And as soon as you walk off the site that afternoon, there's going to be somebody with a microphone maybe stuck in your face wanting to talk to you. But you can just, we've reported it and walk away. You don't have to sit there. One thing, this meeting we had the other day in San Diego, we talked about media relationships. And the one thing you don't want to get hung up with is no comment, no comment, no comment, because that can really come back to haunt you later on. But you can walk away, you can ignore it, you can just keep walking. You don't have to deal with the media. That is the corporate issue. They need to be dealing with the media. Okay. Again, protecting the scene, we get things closed off. Depending on the severity of the accident or injury, you should have yellow tape somewhere. That would be in your investigative toolkit at a minimum. But yellow tape to cordon off the area. If you've got other barricades to cordon off the area, it's good to do that. Whatever is in the area associated with the accident, we need to be able to touch and gather that information later. Yeah.
This might sound like a silly question, but does it have to be yellow? I mean, I would think that we would want to use red.
Anything that ropes it off.
Because, I mean, I think in construction, the general knowledge is red, it means stay out.
Okay.
So,
Customarily, and again, I've never seen red tape used. I like the idea, red tape sounds good to me. Customarily, when, police show up at a crime scene, you see them taping it off with yellow tape. I know that you go to Home Depot and Lowe's, they have the huge rolls of yellow tape. If there's red tape, hey, red, yellow, black, white, whatever you need to do to cordon off the area is a big issue there. If you've got, sawhorses at your disposal to, again, further barriers and protection just to protect the area, let's do that. But we want to keep people out because there's just so many things that could go wrong in a matter of hours, and certainly if it goes into the next day, things disappearing and stuff like that, we need to protect, we need to preserve and handle that. Again, you've got the training, the experience of the individuals involved as far as the accident investigation. We can share this kind of information downstream as much as we need to. Part of the issue for you guys today is kind of a train-to-trainer type thing. You would be expected to take the lead on this stuff, but at the same time, you want to spread this knowledge out to others on your job site. You don't necessarily need to spread it to the common laborer in the ditch, but he or she needs to understand some of the issues that go on as well. We've gotten some great information over the years from the laborer in the ditch who recognized a problem, and unfortunately, maybe there was just, again, a culture deal where they didn't elevate what they saw to the appropriate people. But we had an accident about 20 years ago, and it was an issue of two painters on a bridge. They were painting underneath the bridge. And what they had done, they had a platform, they basically hung off the rail of the bridge. And so one guy would be down on the platform painting underneath, and the other guy, his job, believe it or not, and they told us this was his job was to stand on the bridge deck, because there was active traffic on the bridge. But his job was to stand on the bridge deck and look out for tall vehicles. Okay? This was a series of 3 bridges, and they were painting the middle bridge. They had not closed off traffic underneath the bridge. So, one way to improve that operation would have been close off these lanes, paint, move over, close off these lanes, paint, move over, that kind of a deal. But no, traffic was still running, so we got Joe up here watching out for tall vehicles. Joe takes a break. 10 o'clock in the morning. Jose's still down there painting. Jose's back is to the oncoming traffic. And we had a statement from literally a laborer in a ditch off on the side doing some other work with this project. And he said, it was obvious. Something was going to go wrong here. Well, sure enough, Joe's not up there watching for the tall vehicle. Here comes a box truck under the platform. Oh, the other thing, if Joe saw the tall vehicle, Jose, get up here, a tall vehicle coming, he would scamper up, and they would raise the platform. Let the vehicle pass under, then they would set it back down, and Jose back down on the, okay. Box truck comes under, and he's just tall enough that he clips the platform. Well, he clips the platform, and again, Jose's got his back, but he doesn't see this thing coming. No big issue. Flips him up, drops him on top of the trailer. Probably no injury at that point. But then he rolls off the trailer, the pavement below. He effectively lands on his head. He's not killed. But he had an injury they described or called a spastic quadriplegia. And you all know what a quadriplegia is. I mean, you can't move from here down. Well, a spastic quad, not only can they not move, but their body is basically frozen like this. This young man was mid-20s. I saw him about 3 years later in a mediation where we were trying to settle the case. And we ultimately were able to settle our contractor out of the case. Now, this goes back far enough that our contractor's total amount of coverage at that time was $11 million. We were able to cut a deal, and we paid our $11 million and got a release. They ended up litigating that case against the trucking company. We were out of the case and we weren't involved in the litigation. The jury took the case. They came up with a gross value award of $26 million. When they allocated some responsibility to the individual and the responsibility to the trucker, and of course we weren't there, we were an empty chair, they did an allocation to our contractor as well. The allocation of that $26 million to our contractor would have amounted to $18 million. We had settled for 11. That's all the insurance he had. Had we litigated that case, same or similar result, our contractor would have been sitting there with a $7 million direct hit out of pocket. So again, something as basic as we were the general contractor. This was a subcontractor employee that was injured. Yeah, we had defense and indemnity from his carrier, but it wasn't $11 million worth. It wasn't $18 million worth. As far as the subcontractor goes, they didn't have any assets. I mean, they had a couple of these platforms and they had their painting equipment and tools and what have you, but they didn't have the wherewithal to pay on an indemnity basis for the contract they had signed with our contractor. So again, you got to keep these things in mind. If people in a ditch can look at that kind of scenario and say, you know, this isn't right, then what's wrong with our supervisory personnel who should be seeing the same thing? But more importantly, go back to the question of culture. If the guy in the ditch is seeing something like this develop in front of him, and either his own culture in terms of his ethnicity, where he was raised and what have you, he doesn't feel comfortable raising the issue, or maybe it's the culture of the company or the project. Well, I can't tell so-and-so about this. You know, they'll be blaming me. I'm a troublemaker if I bring this up. We need to have an open, honest, candid opportunity for people at the lowest level to say, time out. We know something's wrong here. Something needs to be done. So again, encourage in your toolbox talks and things like that, encourage people. If you see something wrong out there, let us know. Because you're going to spend a lot of your time, one, in the trailer, doing what you need to do in the trailer, and you're there an hour or so before the project starts on a day, you're there an hour or so after the project ends during the day. You've got a lot of things to do. Plus, depending on the size of the project, you may be managing more than one project. But you've got these guys on site, day in and day out. They know what's going on. They've got to have that culture. They've got to have that ability to come in and talk, to tell you this is wrong, that's wrong, we need to change something, and you know, this is what I saw. And if they do that, you know, it can't be an issue of somebody, you know, keep your mouth shut. It's got to be, hey, thank you, let us look at this, let's look into it, and not only look into it, but do something about it, okay? Focusing only on the employees involved. I mean, particularly, again, if we're talking about injuries, our focus has got to be that individual, whether it be our guy or subcontractor's guy. What do we need to do immediately to care for that individual? Very recently, we had a subcontractor fatality. And we had no control over this part of it. But because of the investigative agencies and everything that's showing up on site, this individual's body laid there for about 3 hours before they finally removed the body. Now, had it been an injury, I'm pretty certain we could have gotten them out a whole lot faster. But again, just need to keep those things in mind. Focus on that individual. When you're focused on the individual, interesting deal with Street Road Contractor a number of years ago. They were putting together a rebar column. They would put the column together, they would set it in place, form it up, and fill it full of concrete. So as they were lifting this column in place, they had the little cross member rebar pieces in between to help hold things in place. As they're putting this thing in place, one of those cross members slips out. And we got a guy down at the bottom of the column, he's watching it go up, and this thing slips out, and it's probably 25 feet up, and it, like a little spear. It hit him right here. It exited right here. He was alive. They got him stretched out on the ground. One thing to keep in mind, if you got an injury, don't move the person. Wait till you get the appropriate people on site. Don't move him. You never know what other damages may cause. But he's sitting there, and obviously he's bleeding. He's having some difficulty breathing, but he's still very much alive. And they've got 911 on the phone, and they're trying to explain to the 911 operator what the issue is, and what's hit him, and what they see, and everything else. And what I'm envisioning is this guy's laying there, and you've got one employee holding each arm, and you probably have 2 employees holding down the legs. You got one guy on the phone, and one guy standing at the head of the individual laying there. And they're telling the operator, well, he can't breathe, and it looks like he's choking to death. Operator's trying to calm him down. We got an ambulance on the way, patience, and we're going to take care of this. And our guy standing at the head said, I can't deal with this anymore. I'm going to pull it out. Oh. Now, if you watched any old Western movies and you got the soldier or somebody who's been shot with an arrow, what do they normally do? They push it through as opposed to trying to pull it out, because customarily the arrows had, whatever on it, so you didn't want to pull it out. Well, this guy does pull it out, and he got a clean shot and pulled it right out. And the guy survived. Not a recommended course of action. But again, our guys are very creative out there. We can make this happen. We can build things. We can pull rebar out of the guy's head. But again, these are things that do happen. These are live deals we've dealt with out there. So again, focus on the employee. What do we need to do to take care of him at the time? And then post-accident, we still need to be focused on the individual. If it's our guy, what do we do internally as far as a workers' compensation claim and dealing with our people? They've been injured, dealing with the family and what have you. Everything from who's going to go and knock on the door at the home and explain to the wife, something's happened, Joe's at the hospital, come with us, we'll take you. Oh, by the way, what about the kids? Is there a neighbor? Is there grandma? Whatever. What do we need to do to help you? These are things we need to be prepared to do. And again, too, if we don't pre-plan for this kind of stuff, it can be that Chinese fry drill. Who's going to do it? The last thing you want to do is pick up the phone and call the house. Say, by the way, there's an issue, Joe's at the hospital, can you get there? I mean, let's be proactive, let's take the lead on that, and let's also hope that if it's something involving our subcontractors, they've got a plan in place to handle the same thing. It's difficult for us to take the lead with a subcontractor employed, but again, we need to encourage our subs to do the same thing. Recent fatality accident involving a subcontractor employee. And end of the day, the subs people were all gone. Our people were winding up what had happened. This is the same accident where our sign showed up on in the morning paper. And before our people got away from the site that afternoon, Dad, Mom, we believe Dad's employer, and yet a 4th person showed up at the site. Agitated individuals, their son had been killed. And so our people ended up dealing one-on-one with them. Not something you want to do. Not a position you want to be in. And again, we'll talk about some of the issues related to that accident, but it gets back to the pre-job planning, the task planning. Something should have never happened. Matter of seconds, matter of minutes would have avoided that whole accident, but yet it led to that really a confrontational type experience with the family that is not a fun deal. What's your culture? You think about what goes on here at Kitchell and carry this over to what goes on, let's say, in your own household. Who's got kids? Something happens at home with your kids. Who's got either has or has had teenage drivers? Something goes on, they have the accident. I mean, where are you going to be? Are we looking at blaming everybody for what happened? Are we looking at just the crisis itself? We're looking at what we're going to do to improve this for the future. Ideally, we'd like to get that little crossover between all three. From an investigative standpoint, the last thing we need to be looking at day one is blame. Find out what happened. How many times have you seen in the media where they jump off on a tangent and they've identified responsibility for some event? And one I can think of really off the top of my head, many, many years ago, there was the bombing. It might have been the Olympics or something in Atlanta, and they had identified this individual. He was responsible. It was his fault. It definitely and it turned out he wasn't.
Richard Jewell.
But they ruined his life, basically. So we don't want to jump into the blame game. There'll be plenty of time to talk about what happened, but let's forget the blame. Let's talk about the crisis itself. Be objective, determine what happened out there, look for what needs to be improved and or changed. But again, if you get in there and you start pointing fingers right up front, a lot of information we need to get, we're never going to get. So let's look at it from that standpoint. So again, think in terms of what your culture is, and again, go back to you personally, the company, the client, the project. You could have a different issue all the way around. You've got to somehow meld all that together to hopefully get into that common area between all three. But it's something very important to work on, and something that we don't want you to be doing it every day. So it's a challenge. But again, something that you carry this over to home and everything else, and it might help you there as well. Okay, we're going to talk about what is the SWOT, what to do in case of the SWOT, and basically how many ACIGs had in the last 5 years. We talked about a rule of 10 earlier, so that's the same slide there, just a little bit different format. What happens if we get any one of these things? We're going to start with a phone call. That first phone call, I would assume, Josh, is you. Okay, in most cases, you're going to get the first call. And then do you take the lead in calling Jim Swanson and others on the senior management team here? That's the second phone call. Third phone call should be me. And at that point, Josh and I will be having a discussion what goes on next. And if y'all want or need, would like to have before you leave here, after hours contact cards. My name's listed first, oddly enough. But anyway, all the claims people are listed first. Don't hesitate. Take one of these with you. Keep it in your stuff at your projects. It folds, it trial folds. It'll fit right in your wallet as well. But again, I'd rather get a phone call from you personally, Josh next, whomever. I'd rather get a phone call and let's have a discussion about what the issue is and whether or not we need to employ a SWOT investigation. A lot of times we can hash things out over the phone, but when in doubt, guess what? I'm moving towards your job site, wherever it may be.
Whether it's right or not,
Mm-hmm.
typically the first call is received by our project director or divisional manager. Then I'm like second or third on the list.
Whatever y'all's process is, as long as it works. I will say this. We track from the time of the incident to the time we get the phone call. Now, 2 or 3 years ago, that delta time was probably 5 to 6 hours. And there were, unfortunately, a number of cases that went, several days, which increased the delta time. In today's market, in most cases, that delta time is about 45 minutes. So it's almost obviously as quickly as Josh finds out, we find out. And the big issue is there can be a reluctance to make that first phone call, but we've got resources out the wazoo that aren't worth anything. We don't know what happened. We don't have a crystal ball. Yes, sir.
How does this work if you're, as a construction manager or project manager representing the owner, and you've got various contractors working for you that you're managing, and in your contract, the contract says you're responsible for the safety of everybody on site, it's your responsibility. And one of your general contractors says a fatality or something on there, what is the process that would follow that type of scenario?
Make a phone call. And let's start talking at that point. Because the thing is, in y'all's position, 2 things. One, if you were strictly a construction manager, maybe we are one step removed from any responsibility. If you're the GC, you're right, you have the ultimate responsibility for safety for everybody out there. And yet we've got all the contracts in place, hopefully giving us the right to pass that off to someone else. But guess what? Our name customarily is going to be on a banner somewhere near the front gate of that project. They can check records real quickly to find out who the general contractor is. They know who the owner is because his name is going to be somewhere on a banner as well, probably. The owner and the general contractor, at a minimum, are going to get sued. So from that standpoint, we do have that ultimate responsibility. Then we start working on passing it to the appropriate parties with the financial wherewithal and the most control over what happened. But yeah, we need to be involved with it so we can gather that information to make sure what's going on.
But that's with the general contractor. Now, if you're a construction manager,
Construction manager, we should be standing in the same shoes as the owner in most cases, and we then are looking at the general contractor. But even in that scenario, make a phone call. Let's talk about that. Let's make sure. You may be out there, for example, thinking, I'm just a construction manager. There may be some other change in the documents that maybe happened you weren't aware of, but let's make the phone call, let's talk about it, and ensure that we're all on the same page. Again, I would rather have the phone call, I would rather get on a plane and make a trip and find out after the fact, not our problem, than to find out 2 or 3 days later we haven't done anything, and now we got a problem. Because so much changes there in the first 24 to 48 hours. Things disappear, witnesses disappear, people forget, or worse yet, when you get that delay and you got responsible parties gathering up, okay, what's our story this time? We got to have a common story. If you say this and you say this, we've got to agree this is what happened. That's why we interview witnesses separately. But if they've got 2 or 3 days to get together, go out and have a beer, talk about it, stuff like that, they can concoct issues that are far different from what may have really happened out there. So make the phone call, we can start working from there. Okay. The whole purpose of the SWOT investigation is to look at that catastrophic event, pull everything together, get all the necessary people involved earlier as opposed to later. In many, many cases, we will package up all of the material, and unless there is an active claim presented right then and there, we set it aside until a formal active claim is made. Now granted, on a workers' compensation issue, we got an active problem, we got treatment that needs to be handled, the individual needs to be taken care of, and all this kind of stuff. So there's stuff going on right then and there, and then we're also looking maybe at the potential liability issues after the fact. But on a general liability type investigation, depending on what we're dealing with, we're going to gather this up, package it up, and unless there's an obvious liability responsibility to us as ACIG, to you as the contractor, we may set it aside until a formal claim is made. Many plaintiff attorneys will step back, and as soon as they find out about an incident, they will do their investigation. And many plaintiff attorneys, there's what they call the statute of limitations, in different jurisdictions or different lengths. Customarily, 2 years to 5 years is the spread of time that someone has to actually file a formal claim. And many plaintiff attorneys will wait till right at the end of that statute, file a claim on the hope that we know nothing about it. But if we've done our timely investigation, if we had that discussion up front, we've got all of our material, we've got photographs, we've got statements, we've got whatever filed away, we're ready. We know what's there. They make their allegations, we know what we can do to challenge it. So again, the phone call is the first thing. Everything we can do to get started with the phone call. I've got a magic 8 ball sitting on my desk, but that doesn't help me if I don't get a phone call, okay? The idea of something involving one of the Rule of 10s, the mandatory activation of the SWAT team, unless Jim Swanson here and Mike O'Neill in my office say no. I don't know what Josh's attitude would be toward Jim locally, but I'm not going to go to Mike and say, guess what, I really don't think I need to make that trip, and I'm really tired today, and I've been on the road the last 2 weeks, I just don't want to make that trip to Phoenix. I'm not going to have that discussion. I'll be on the plane, I'm coming to Phoenix, or I'm coming to California, I'm coming to South Texas, wherever your project may be, I'll go. And again, if we don't have an issue, great, I got an early trip back home. but I will go and make that early trip, as opposed to, again, having that discussion 3 days later, we really screwed this up. So your CEO, your division managers, your safety and or claims manager, selected defense counsel. We've got select attorneys that Kitchell's already identified. They want to handle their work in just about any jurisdiction you're working. If for some reason we need a defense attorney and David hasn't identified somebody, we've got resources to identify an attorney to get them out there if we need them. My CEO, the risk management executive, that's Jack Florence, if you guys know Jack. Who's the safety consultant now for Kitchell?
Overall.
Overall, okay. And then I'm the consultant, and we have coverage counsel. Sometimes that's going to involve some of the contractual issues we might have either downstream or upstream. So we've got a coverage attorney outside of Dallas that advises you guys on those kinds of questions. And particularly on our workers' compensation claims, we have a medical advisor we have on retainer. He's outside of Atlanta, Georgia. Dr. Dawkins is an occupational medical doctor. He's got contacts and resources nationwide. If we've got an unusual medical event, either in terms of an accident or injury, or if Kitchell has an unusual medical event within your operation. We've had calls to Steve about MRSA and other issues and having nothing to do with the employment, but here's an individual who's been off for a period of time. They're ready to come back to work. Are there any cautions we need to take? Do we have a medical release from the doctor? Steve's available to have those kinds of discussions. We had a contractor several years ago when the bird flu issue was such a concern, and they wanted to have medications available if they ever encountered it, and Steve also has a pharmacy set up within his operation. He was able to provide the medications that they wanted. And another contractor who, because of where they were working and some of the environments they were dealing with, they wanted a supply of EpiPens that they could make available on their projects. Steve was able to facilitate that. So he's got a lot of options for us, and again, he's accessible to you guys directly as an employer, being in the ACIG group. He's very much involved in significant, serious, unusual medical issues, either on the workers' compensation side. He's also advised us on general liability type injury exposures, and he's on retainer for us, and he does an hourly rate deal as it relates to these other specific contacts. We've made him available to our TPA work comp adjusters, and if we're dealing with nurse case managers, they have access to Steve as well. And it's kind of like you guys, you go contractor to contractor, you could have a meeting or phone call with your counterparts at another subcontracting operation. You pick up the phone, they'll talk to you. If I've got a medical question for a medical provider out there, they are a lot less likely to speak to me as an adjuster, but when I have a doctor call, Steve and that provider can have that communication and we can get information. And even with the issues today of HIPAA and other privacy and everything else, you know, Steve's initial call to them is, I'm the medical advisor for ACIG, and particularly on the workers' compensation issues, I'm here to assist, I'm here to consult and advise on what's happening with Joe Smith, and I understand you're the treating doctor, can we discuss it? And again, doctor to doctor, they will have that discussion, and that gets us, a lot of times we want to make sure that we've got our guy at the right facility. You take the medical services available in Phoenix, the medical services that are available, let's say in Chicago, great medical facilities in both locations. But if we're dealing with something very specific in terms of the accident or injury, there may be a better facility in New York, a better facility in Atlanta, and Steve can help facilitate the discussion of a transfer for that patient from here to there to get the best possible medical services. One of the benefits you guys have as far as the ACIG program is we are a lot more liberal in terms of what we need to do for our people that are injured as opposed to the traditional insurance market. A lot of that goes back to, guess what guys, you've got a lot of money on the front end. So it is your call that we do this. And we've taken patients from Chicago, we've had them treated, let's say, in Atlanta, and in addition to transporting the individual to Atlanta, if he's going to be there for several days, a week, or whatever, there's also a benefit maybe to having a family member there as well. So we will incur the cost of moving the family member with him, put them up at a hotel, put them on a per diem, so that they've got, food and other resources at their disposal. If we need to assist in making some child care services available at home, we can work on that too. Again, we can be very liberal in terms of what we do to take care of our people. And the fact that you've got your direct retention, the fact that we control the first $5 million, we can handle those things and nobody's going to be questioning us as to what we're doing. Again, you get into the traditional insurance market, and they're going to say the law says this is your obligation. That's all you need to do. The reason Kitchell and your other 40 partners are in the ACIG program is you were kind of put off with that standard of care, that standard of response in the traditional insurance industry. That's why you've come together in the partnership in this program. You've all got a common thought, a common theme in terms of dealing with safety, accident investigations, what have you. If you were looking at something like that, is that a SWAT claim? Granted, that's street and road, and you wouldn't necessarily have that particular issue, but you've got large equipment on your projects, and things can go wrong. And if you get some major issue with a large piece of equipment, I mean, for general builders, we have lots of scissors lift that tend to fall over for different reasons. So yeah, that would be a SWAT claim. Depending on who you are, that could be a real problem, but we're not going to create a SWAT claim for that. Okay. True story. I think that is in China, I believe.
Yes.
But I mean, it can happen. They imploded a building in, I think it was Corpus Christi, or between Corpus Christi and South Padre Island, because the building was sinking. It couldn't be fixed. They took it down. But yeah, that would be a SWAT claim if we unfortunately build something like that and that happened. Kitchell's not going to build it. We know that for sure. If you're Wile E. Coyote, that's a SWAT claim for him. We know that. Okay, investigative goals, locate, identify, collect evidence, information relevant to the accident. Again, I think there's a slide shortly after this where we talk about an accident investigation kit and what you need. But again, find out what happened. Ask the questions. Take photographs. We're going to, as far as examining and analyzing evidence, your primary function on the front end is to protect, secure, preserve, and to some degree maybe gather, but as far as the actual examination analysis, we are going to bring in experts to help us do those things. But if you've secured the scene, then that way, if it's 24 hours, if it's 48 hours, we can get those experts in to gather stuff up. And if we've taken photographs shortly after the accident, we've got other information that we can refer back to. We had a claim a number of years ago. Unfortunately, a lot of these things involve street and road contractors, but this was kind of a unique issue with a street and road contractor. And are you guys familiar with what they call a belly dump truck? Okay. We've got a belly dump truck coming down a rural road, and he's going to come across a railroad crossing. So you've got the little rise up and the little rise down coming across the crossing. Well, he's in a belly dump truck. There are just the crossbuck signs on the railroad crossing, no gates, no whistles, no lights or anything like that. And to get up that little rise, I mean, he's got to slow the truck down. Of course, once you slow the truck down to get started again, it's a bit of a challenge. And as he's going across with the belly dump, I mean, he's almost touching the rails as he goes across there. So he's not moving real fast. And it was like, I think it was 3 rails that he needed to cross. And he gets up there, and lo and behold, he gets broadsided by a train. Now, the good news is, our guy, minor injury. The train hit the trailer and took the trailer probably several hundred yards down the road. We managed to derail 3 diesels and about 14 cars. At least half of the 14 cars were car carriers, so they were loaded with new vehicles. And so you had lots of scattering debris and everything else around there. Our 2 safety guys, this was in South Texas, our 2 safety guys were on the site. One safety guy was actually there in less than an hour. And then they were both back out at the site later that afternoon. Well, the first guy gets there and goes, this is far enough back that we were using film as opposed to digital cameras. And Gary gets on site and he shot 8 or 10 rolls of film. And then he and Rick go out there later that afternoon and they stand there at the crossing. They look both directions. Perfectly flat, as far as you could see. And it's like, how come he didn't see the train? They go to the hospital after that. They talk to the individual, and I never saw him. I never heard him. Well, yeah, there's no warning signals at the crossing, but surely he's blowing a horn, blowing a whistle, blowing something. I never saw him. I never heard him. They go back to the scene. They look both ways. They, wait a minute, this is crazy. They had dropped that film at a overnight processing service that afternoon. They picked up the film the next morning. So out of all of these shots, and again, a lot of this is just random shots, not really knowing what he was getting, but I'm just going to shoot, 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 shoot. Out of all of these shots, there were like 7 pictures. Anybody know what a spur line is? Here you got your main lines coming here, and the spur line runs like down at an angle away from it. Well, as he was coming up the rural road, there was a spur line to his right. When he was coming up the rural road, there were about 26 empty cars sitting on the spur line. Gary had gotten to the scene early enough that when he took all of those shots, he had like 7 shots of these 25 empty cars. Within an hour of the accident, those 25 empty cars disappeared. They're gone. Well, this was Santa Fe, and they had actually pulled those cars out and moved them about 3 miles up the line. We were able to take those 7 shots, and we had some aerial photography later of the crossing, and then we were able to interpose those 7 shots in there, and came up with the argument that, well, yeah, with those empty cars sitting there, 1, it obstructed his view. 2, it certainly had an impact on what he could hear. Now, the rest of the story on the hearing part was our guy had a hearing deficit, so that was another issue. But long story short, we ended up paying about $985,000 on that claim. But it could have been twice or maybe 3 times that amount, but for those 7 photographs. We actually contemplated trying that case, since it was just a property damage case, based on those 7 photographs, but then we were looking at what the cost of defense would be, what the potential would be for an adverse verdict. We did pull in front of the train, there's no question about that. But again, photographing what's going on out there, you never know what you're going to get sometimes. Now, you bring a professional photographer out, he or she knows what they're trying to capture in a shot. But sometimes random shots can go a long way toward explaining what goes on. Reconstruction of the sequence of events and the evidence, again, we will have experts assisting us on that area. There are people who specialize in putting things together. There are people who specialize in building models of an event so that you have got that visual image of what happened. We had a case a number of years ago, again, a street and road contractor, but again, similar issues could involve a general builder. But it was a road accident where they had a crossover, a change in the lanes. And it was a head-on accident where the guy literally crossed over the lane and he hit a truck head-on. And they were claiming in the plaintiff's case that it was such a sharp change in the lanes, there was no way he could be aware of what was happening as he's approaching. We built a model. We had a model that in the first trial actually sat right in front of the jury box. That model cost us $50,000. But every time that jury went in, that jury went out there, sitting and looking, and I mean, it was just a nice gradual crossover. There was none of this sudden change. And we won the first case. defense verdict, didn't pay him a dime. Because of a technicality in the proceedings, they got a second trial. We never made an offer in the second trial, won that one too. But the model is probably one of the big issues. So we will have people that can assist us after the fact in giving graphic or tangible type evidence that they can look at to determine and explain what happened. Again, objective information. We're not looking at fault on the front end in terms of what happened. Let's be objective. Let's gather it all together. We can have the fault discussions much, much later. But let's gather up whatever we've got objectively to make those determinations. Other goals, determine root cause. We'll talk about root cause issues in a little more detail later today. Prevent reoccurrence. Lessons learned. We have started in this year alone, I think we've done 3 what we're calling lessons learned bulletins. Josh, when you get those, what's the widespread circulation on those? Or how far down?
Try to send them out to all police KCIs.
Okay. Well, what we're doing basically, we're coming up with a lessons learned bulletin, and we're taking some specific live events that's impacted one of our contractors, and we're laying this out here, and these are the facts. This is what happened, this is the investigation, but more importantly, what we're trying to glean from that is, whether it be a general builder, industrial maintenance, or a street road contractor, how can we avoid these things in the future? And another thing, I should have told you early on, the makeup of the ACIG program are general builders. That's the largest group in our 41 contractors today. Street and road follows next. Probably of the 41 contractors, I believe 14 of them are street and road. And our smallest segment today is industrial maintenance. So the guys working in the steel mills, petrochemical plants, and things like that. And then within each of these groups, many of our contractors, some of their growth the last 5 years or better have been acquisitions of other industry types. For example, we've got a street road contractor north of Chicago who managed to sneak into Chicago and buy a general builder. And you better believe that his partners, who are general builders in Chicago, were a bit upset that somehow he found out this company was available, and they didn't find out it was available. They would have bought it. So again, some of the diversification our guys have done to get into other fields, that has generated some significant growth within the ACIG program without having to add new members. So we'd rather grow that way as opposed to bringing in that new contractor we know nothing about and stuff like that. Another interesting thing about the ACIG program, you don't get in without a reference and a referral from an existing member. You know, if you want to change your auto or homeowner's policy next week, you start making phone calls, or you start looking at web pages and talking to your friends and neighbors. You know, who do you have, and what's it costing you, and you know, are you happy with the service and stuff like that. You know, you go in and get quotes and bids. Well, for the ACIG program, to get in here, number one, you got to have a referral from an existing member. And there's a whole lot of paperwork that goes on the front end. We're going to know as much about them as they know about us before they come in the door. And of the current membership, it's almost like a fraternity or sorority. One blackball, you don't get in. So a lot of these guys know each other from different peer groups that they participate in and things like that. They know a lot about each other's business practices and things like that. So again, this is a unique group of guys that you guys are participating with. It is a very unique partnership from that standpoint. So again, prevent reoccurrence, foster a safe workplace. Anytime you see litigation filed against a general contractor or against the contractor and tied to something that's happened on the job, something that's gone wrong, whether we're talking about injury or we're talking about property damage, it gets back to the issue, you have a duty, you have an obligation to provide a safe place to work. And we can defend what we've done, but that's going to be the allegation, which go back to the signs you've got out here on the building. That's what they're going to plaster in front of the jury. Yeah, these guys claim they provide a safe place to work. These guys claim they do quality work, and they've got this recognition. They probably would have bought that from somebody type of thing. That's the allegations they're going to make. And, you know, we have a duty to defend a lawsuit like that regardless of how factual or how ridiculous the demands may be. We still have a duty to defend it. And it's just like, who here has been deposed? Okay. You know, when you get deposed, they can come in and ask you pretty much any question they want. And even though your marital status has nothing to do with anything, they're going to ask you, are you married or not? Whether you have children or not has nothing to do with anything. They're asking how many children you have, how old they are. I mean, they're going to get into these kinds of issues. Has nothing to do with anything, but they have a right to do it. And we're going to do the same thing to their people, too. But again, you know, we've got to go in and look at these kinds of things, and the allegation is you didn't give him a safe place to work. Why? Because he got hurt. And in some jurisdictions, we are restricted from talking about maybe what he did to cause his accident because of some of the statutory requirements in those jurisdictions. We have to be aware of those things too. Corrective actions. Again, you're looking at hazard analysis on the front end when you're pre-planning what you're going to do out there. But when something does go wrong, what kind of corrective actions need to be taken so again, it doesn't happen again. That's our goal. If it happens once, we don't want it to happen a second time. Improve morale. If you've been on a project where there's been a significant injury, morale is pretty low. So you've got to start taking steps to get morale built back up and things like that. 2 recent subcontractor fatalities involve bringing counseling type services on site to work with anybody who felt they needed to talk. Just trying to get them back on an even keel, get their head back on straight so that we don't have a repeat of the same problem. Demonstrating leadership. Clearly, Kitchell is a leader in the construction industry, and just another opportunity when something happens, show your leadership, come back. You want to show your leadership to the personnel on a job site, as well as other owners you may work for in the future, as well as the community you're working in as well. And improve the work process. If something's gone wrong, there's got to be a glitch somewhere in the work process. So what do we need to do to improve that? Okay. Why don't we take 5 minutes and stretch, refresh some drinks, and we'll go from there.
You okay on time, Ron?
Oh yeah, we're good. Okay.
Tiring to do all that talking.
If it wasn't for this cold, I'd be a little bit better.
Oh, yeah, that's right, I forgot about that.
But
I'm gonna take one of these for Pat and Conrad too.
yeah, it's funny that we made the move from CNA years ago on a primary TPA to, it was War North Americans now, it's Carl Warren Group. It's a big dog and pony show around the country. And our account manager went with us, and there was 3 consultants. We were doing this thing, and we kept flip-flopping, I'm gonna do this piece, you do this piece. I said, you don't do that, you just, it just works nice and smooth. It's like, you planned that, and just.
Gives you a little variety.
Oh, yeah.
So are you with CEM?
Yes,
Okay.
I'm out of Sacramento or Inland Empire. I live in Phoenix, I live in Scottsdale,
Oh,
but I've worked in California for past almost 20 years, we moved back and forth, so,
wow.
but not all with Kitchell, it was,
Uh-huh.
but prior time, most of it with Jacobs.
How long have you been with Kitchell?
It was January.
Are you gonna keep doing that kind of commuting?
Well, right now, I'm waiting to have a project, youth camp, up in south, in Morgan Hill. So they want to add another, it's a juvenile center, they want to add a new dorm, on the 25th, they want a new gym, kitchen, and administration building. But they're doing stuff with the state, trying to get funding, and also we're doing the bridging documents, so design build. So I've been here, I live here, I'm doing reviewing the drawing and just the documents.
Because that's in Arizona?
No, it's in California.
Oh, it is.
It's south of, about 20 miles south of San Jose. I've worked that area before, I don't care for it.
Talking about the between the roads and stuff. They have their share of them.
Oh, yeah. We've actually got one outside of Baton Rouge right now. It's a contract hauler.
Oh.
And we're right in front of the Amtrak train. And just, again, an unmarked, unsignaled crossing.
Yeah. Like on this part of the country, you don't see that many trains.
No.
You get off down in South Texas, there's a train crossing.
Well, the funny thing is, with your son in Houston, and he shares familiar with the new light rail system. It has a number of accidents, and it's a very quiet light rail. We get a number of accidents. People just trying, they're reading the paper, the textbook, doing whatever. Believe it or not, they got light rail
Yeah,
here.
you commute, get in that purple lane. Breathe on every day.
I know, all that traffic is building back up again.
Oh, yeah, what's with that?
No.
Probably late 70s.
Yeah, I usually do. I didn't go to the office
Anyway,
first.
I was doing a job off down in Beaumont, Port Arthur.
I'm with Carson.
It was commercial,
Money's
work,
great.
some large stuff. But anyway, the dirt contractor I had, I'll never forget.
So sometimes it gets to the point it makes no difference what time you leave.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Still,
But they also, I got to
depends on the day.
Yeah.
So,
They
Generally, the earlier the better.
Yeah, this week I
They were
noticed
on the
it's been a
list.
little lighter.
Railroads had,
Fall break.
that was
Yeah,
like-
a lot of people
Okay.
are.
and them being.
I'm on the road,
dirt
I'm fine
contractor,
with
they had to
it.
put.
Oh, sure.
I noticed it's been heavier this week.
It
There seems to be,
We've got a contract in Knoxville.
more pickup trucks, more people seem to be going to work
Oh, there you go.
for some reason, but it's
They
been,
mobilized.
so I looked at the clock a couple of times, so am I running late, because there's more,
They have
Maybe that's good, maybe it means the economy is improving. There's lots more work out
Monday after.
I think that it is, I think that there is more work out there. A lot of it's,
They spent the first,
so, it's
first 30,
smaller
45
projects.
days.
And right now, the municipalities have money that they have to get spent or lined up for the end of the year.
Gotta love that.
So they're,
And then
finished up.
Project should have been a
They
little
also
more to
moved
push
up
them
to
to there.
Crutchfield's Island.
Start
Taking
looking
over
for,
three.
Oh,
okay, I got you. And so they spend the next 15 months.
But
They're
some
building
of
so many apartments, where are these people
Right,
coming
so
from
that,
to live in?
fire-
That's where I'm.
But a lot of the work that seems to be coming up is all the construction, water work, and
Yeah.
some water related.
And-
Mesa, Gilbert, Chandler, up in Scottsdale, so.
Yeah, we had a chairman for, Bill Knighton, president, CEO, and then chairman of the board. The ultimate bill was the last. Bill had like 5 different numbers listed. The whole thing was, go through the list, and if you get to the bottom, you haven't found anybody, and before you call Bill, go back and try one. Exactly. You don't need. We don't want you calling him.
No, you don't need that bother.
Oh, I've got all of that stuff, laptop, an iPad, reader, a hot dog, the phone.
No matter where you're at, no, it's gonna be everything,
Pull out the
no matter
airport.
what. the news are.
Unless I get, unless I've got
I live in Mesa.
CSA pre-check line, I don't pull anything out. But
Oh,
if I can't, if I don't have a pre-check line, pull anything, I pull it from my laptop.
oh, okay, gotcha. Majority of it just about on.
Well, it's amazing, and we'll keep talking here, it's amazing to look at it after the fact. Just so many times, we just had, you done something a little bit different. There are occasions where we had, actually, we were in Sacramento one year, between Christmas and New Year's, we got a phone call. One of our street road contractors was working New Year's Day,
Oh, okay.
and 18-wheel tractor trailer.
Superintendent.
The guy blew a red light right in front of him.
Supervisor.
There was no way we could control the guy blowing the red light.
Exactly.
What he ended up doing, he swerved to the right, he could have broadsided that truck and killed 5 people in a vehicle.
An accident.
He clipped 2 cars that were on the other side of the intersection, rolling his truck and killed him. But, I'm not sure what would have been different.
Yeah, no, that's true. And some of them.
My back to you, Josh.
Oh, yeah. Okay, Grace circulated the contact card to everybody, and, one thing that we joke about, at least on the claims side, when we get up in the morning, we don't necessarily know where we're going to bed that night, because if something happens, we're flying Timbuktu and we'll be sleeping somewhere else. And, that just is part of what we have to do on the claims side. We're talking about an investigation toolkit, and these are some things that to keep in mind. A lot of these things are pretty routine around a construction site. So measuring devices, everything from a tape measure to a wheel to whatever. To be able to measure distances once something happens. Marking, you've got spray paint, what have you, to mark issues with. Recording, documenting, we used to talk a lot, and we will talk a bit about, handheld recorders and all. Today with the cell phones, so much of that can be handled just with a cell phone too. And again, the issue we've talked about several times already this morning, protecting, preserving, just making sure that we can take the position a week from now, this is what was there at the time it happened. So again, you look at, if you've got a box or something put together with all these different issues in it, that would probably cover just about anything that you might have to do, but more importantly, where is it? Is it in the trailer? Is it in the superintendent's pickup truck? If it's in the pickup truck, where's the superintendent? How long is it going to take him to get there? But if you've got all of these issues put together and available, if you've talked about what you would do and how you would use it, these are the things that would not be a bad idea to start gathering up and making available on the job site. You know, stuff like gloves, I mean, they're kind of a basic issue, but in today's market, I mean, not only are you potentially dealing with maybe some hazardous waste type issues on the project, but more importantly, today, blood and what have you, you need to protect yourself, and just keep those things in mind. But you know, when you think about the toolkit and everything else, your brain. I mean, literally, think about it. I mean, when you get out there, don't lose your common sense. And that goes a long way toward that. And fortunately, all of our brains are bigger than Homer's, I think. So anyway, just keep that in mind. Garbage in, garbage out. Literally, you've heard that for years, but when it comes down to accident investigation, it comes down to preserving information, to protecting information. If it's garbage on the front end, it's garbage on the back side. When it comes into taking photographs, you know, to come in and, you know, take something right up close, that may be great. What is it? You know, if you're going to take photographs of a vehicle, for example, standing back and taking an angled shot from the left front end, same thing on the right front end that shows the entire side of the car. Then you get to the rear and you do the same thing. That's a lot more effective than a photograph of the driver's door. So the same thing if you're talking about an excavation area. We're talking about providing a safe place to work. We just got nailed on a case in New York. It went to a jury. And the question for the jury was, did we have a ladder in the excavation for this guy to get out of the excavation on? Unfortunately, we didn't have a photograph. We had lots of verbal testimony that the ladders were there. And what this guy did, and you know, he tried to climb out of this excavation. It was probably about this deep. And he tried to use some support beams that were crossing over the top of the excavation. And he tried to climb up on that and managed to fall back and, you know, hurt his back. And he claimed there was no ladder. We had lots of information, the ladders were there, we had no photographs. That would have nailed it. And unfortunately, the jury bought his story, not our story, and the dollar value from the jury is $5.5 million. Now, we are appealing that. We've actually got a mediation set next week where hopefully we can go in and make some arguments to get the case resolved at a much more favorable rate. But the fact that the jury didn't buy our story. And juries, like in too many cases, judges and everybody else tend to slant things in favor of a plaintiff. Now, it probably didn't hurt the fact that this particular plaintiff, he was a minority, he was huge, he was tatted out the wazoo, and we had information that he had gang affiliation and he had spent time in prison. How intimidating was he sitting there at the plaintiff table in front of the jury? That may have played a role too, who knows? But again, when you go in front of a jury, there are cases that we won, we shouldn't have won, and a case like this, we lost, and realistically, we shouldn't have lost. So again, garbage in, garbage out. Again, reporting. Nothing happens until it gets reported. Now granted, when we're talking about a serious problem, no question it's going to be reported. But think in terms of the number of times, particularly in the workers' compensation side, oh, I'm okay. You know, let me just go to the trailer and get a Band-Aid or something like that. I'm okay, I'll be back. And yeah, they work the rest of the day, they work the rest of the week. Maybe they know the job is coming to a close or something like that. But 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later, you know, this is really a problem. I mean, that knee just isn't working the way it should be working, and I've got to go see a doctor now. If something happens, what is your process? What is your procedure in terms of evaluating the individual on site, making that informed decision as to whether or not we get them to a medical facility and have them checked out, and at least get some objective sets of eyes. You know, we're not doctors. You know, we can't rely on what we see or don't see type of thing. And again, what is the policy? And as far as a particular project goes, do you have a designated medical facility? If you aren't designating medical facilities near your projects, something you need to think about so that that doctor, that clinic understands who Kitchell is, understands what you're doing
on that particular project, how long you may be there. If you do pre-employment screenings, or maybe you work a deal with this facility, they do your pre-employment screening, so they need to have some incentive to work with you. The last thing you want to have, if you've got a medical facility designated, if we send somebody to the clinic, we would like them to be seen as quickly as possible and not sit there all day. And again, what can we do to facilitate that? It's amazing as far as the office staff and stuff like that at a medical facility, what a dozen donuts, box candy, little things like that might do to raise your level of awareness when your people walk in. And that's what we want, is to recognize who we are and what we're doing. Equally important, and particularly short-term or long-term project, identify where EMS personnel are. Identify where the fire department is. Stop by and say, by the way, I'm so-and-so with Kitchell, we've got this project started, this is what we're building. There may be times that we could have some hazardous materials, you need to be aware of this, here's our MSDS sheet so you know what's there. This is the kind of project we'll be doing some excavation, we're going to do 3-story, 5-story, 10-story building, whatever the case may be. But more importantly, where are they if 911 is called? How do they get to you? And more importantly too, depending on the size of the project, depending on the location of the project, where do they get in? Are there any special security issues of getting them on site? Do we need to meet their vehicles at the front gate, for example, and get them back to where the accident is? We've had situations where 911 is called and they couldn't find us. 911 was called and we had a cave-in on an excavation. We were finally able to dig the guy out and literally had to put him in the back of a pickup truck and meet a helicopter to fly him on. And the 20 minutes that was lost in that transition were very, very valuable in terms of this guy's ultimate recovery. So make sure that our emergency personnel know where we are, who we are, how to get there, what they might be dealing with when they come on site. And just stopping by, talk to the fire captain, things like that goes a long way. Again, just to, from a community standpoint, this is who we are, this is what we're doing. If you're going to prep for the investigation, again, a lot of things happen. You've got to make instantaneous decisions. Depending on the severity of the injury, severity of the accident, we've got to get people in place, or the EMS in place and things like that. Gathering your toolkit, developing a checklist, setting up an investigation team, practicing. Now again, these are things we can do on a proactive basis outside of an actual event. We don't need to jump through every one of these steps when something happens, because immediately when something happens, call 911. Do what you need to do to help and protect the individual laying on the ground or wherever he may be laying. Again, don't move him. Leave him in place. Maybe, depending on what the 911 operator tells you, you may prop his feet up. You may want to keep him warm, things of that nature. If they say prop the head up, fine, do that. But abide by the instructions from the operator until the appropriate personnel get on site. If you have people who are trained in first aid type processes, try to get them involved as well. They may have a little more knowledge than what most people would have out there. But again, think about what you're looking at. Don't freak out. Josh and Grace had the benefit the other day in San Diego to hear a presentation. And I don't think you realized it as the guy started the presentation, but it turned out he was the injured party. And it was a very damning accident as to how he got injured, and quite frankly, a very fortunate event that he survived the accident. But part of the presentation included a clip of the 911 call. And there was literally a person freaking out in the background of the call. You need to try to identify who that person may be in terms of a pre-planning thing, and that's not necessarily the person you want directly involved if you can avoid it.
There are people who handle serious issues and incidents better than others. So as you go back to your projects tomorrow, start looking at your personnel on site. When you go to a new project next year, won't be as good. Understanding what is needed for a full investigation before you start is critical. You're rarely going to be the eyewitness to an accident. The big issue is most eyewitnesses are very unreliable in terms of what they saw. You know, 3 or 4 eyewitnesses, depending on which street corner they may be standing on, are seeing 3 or 4 different things. It's amazing how an eyewitness testimony may come out as to an issue. We had a case in Chicago, and there was a gentleman downtown, and he was actually heading to the industrial workers' compensation building. And believe it or not, he's standing on the street corner, ready to cross the street. He's got crutches up behind his neck. He's going to walk across the street carrying his crutches. He happens to almost step off the curb in front of a vehicle. Somebody grabbed him, pulled him back. An hour later, he goes hobbling into the industrial judge's courtroom. Judge is sitting on the stand. She calls the 2 attorneys up and says, "Gentlemen, for reasons that I can't explain to you right now, I strongly suggest that y'all get out in the hallway with this claimant and you come to a resolution and get this thing resolved. Report back here in an hour, and if you can't do it, then I'll explain what I'm talking about." Well, it turned out the car that he almost stepped in front of was driven by the judge. So again, eyewitness testimony can come out in really strange places. We had a case many years ago in Florida with Travelers Insurance Company, and these 2 claimants had come into the office to settle their case, and they both got, you know, the big foam cervical collars on and everything, and they reached a settlement and they're leaving. We were on the 3rd floor of a 3-story building. They get on the elevator. One of our support people happened to be on the elevator. She reported later that, yeah, they got in there, and as soon as the elevator doors shut, one of them ripped that collar off his neck. He said, "I thought you said I'd get more money if I wore this thing." There are people out there like that. So we don't employ any of those people, do we? The scene is what's there and not necessarily the cause. Yeah, keep that in mind. I mean, again, we're looking at the causation as what led up to the accident. But everything is going to start backtracking from the accident scene to get to that level. You can't be biased. You know what assumptions mean. You can't go and assume certain things. And check those prejudices at the door. I mean, whatever you may feel about that individual, race, sex, religion, whatever, check it at the door. Because again, what we're looking for is objective information. And we can address all those other questions and concerns later on, but objectively, what can we support? What happened? Those of you that are young and old enough to remember Dragnet, and certainly if you've seen the reruns, just the facts.
John, you remember Dragnet?
Yep, Sergeant Friday, you did it right.
We're looking for the
Still
facts.
on me to you.
That's a good show.
But many years ago, as that show came out, I mean, it still means the same thing today. Whether we're talking about our current investigative police forces or otherwise, what are the facts? I mean, too many things happen where people, put their spin on it. And it's a world full of spin today, whether you're talking politicians running on the line. What are the real facts behind it?
We get the facts, we got a very clear understanding of what happened. It keeps us from persecuting innocent people. And that does happen. It leads us toward the right root causes. I mean, there's never a single event that caused an accident. There may not be a direct root cause when it's all over and done with, but there are a combination of issues that led to what happened. And again, too, we're talking about corrective actions. How do we get there? What do we need to do differently, hopefully to avoid this from happening in the future? Because again, keeping in mind, as a general contractor, you have the ultimate responsibility for everything that happens on that job site. Contractually, we try to pass it off. But at the end of the day, you've got the ultimate responsibility. Now, one thing to keep in mind, Kitchell calls it clips. The liability, which is going to be potentially an additional $280,000 or more, plus there'll be a lot more expenses on the liability side as opposed to the workers' compensation side. So it just becomes that more important. We talk about, in many cases, for our general builders or for any of our contractors on site, get out of the trailer. You've got to know what's going on out there. Whether you're the project manager, whether you're the superintendent, whether you're the foreman, you've got to be aware of what's going out there. If you aren't aware of what's going out there, how can you ensure that things are being done right? JHAs, THAs, and other documents that our subcontractors are completing, great documents to have. But if you got clean, good-looking paperwork, but you're still having problems, there's something wrong there. That paperwork's not going to defend us down the road if something's gone wrong. Care for the injured, we've talked about that many, many times. Get the appropriate personnel out there to get them to the appropriate facility. Again, even if this is a subcontractor employee, we, ACIG, are going to be more involved with you guys probably than their own carriers, but call 911, get the people on board, get them to the hospital. Protect other people and property. Again, depending on what's happened, for example, unfortunately, we've had two very recent electrocution deaths with subcontractors. One of the big issues on the front end is, do we still have live hot power out there where the accident occurred? And what's the potential that somebody else could get hurt before we get the appropriate power people on site or whatever to de-energize lines? So again, if we've got the potential of a subsequent accident happening, in one of these electrocution cases, the guy was in an excavation, and as horrible as it was for him to be killed, he was on one side of the excavation, another laborer on the other side, and an operator up on a backhoe. If either one of them had tried to grab him when he first hit that underground line, we would have had 3 fatalities. So again, make sure that whatever's happened on that scene, we've got it safe so that things can happen around it, but keep it secure, keep it protected. Notifying the appropriate party, identifying witnesses, and if appropriate, try to go ahead and get statement from them. And one thing that's important, particularly with our people, we know who's on the site. With our subcontractors, it's kind of the same thing. If we can get a list from that subcontractor as soon after that incident as possible, we know that these 10 guys were there. Whether they saw anything is a secondary question. But if we know these 10 guys were there, we can talk to these 10 guys at some time to determine what they may have seen. What we're trying to avoid is that 11th guy showing up later who was never there. And it's amazing how many times this happens. It was either 60 Minutes or 2020, one of the news shows a number of years ago. And because of the fraud issues surrounding insurance claims and what have you, they staged a bus accident, I believe it was in San Francisco. And the whole idea was, let's stage this accident out there and let's see what happens. And after they staged the accident, the number of people on the sidewalk who managed to jump onto the bus after it was stopped and the doors were open, holding their necks. Well, they were never there. But you know what? There was an attorney somewhere, there was a doctor somewhere who was going to support their claim. They had a neck and back injury, and they were on the sidewalk when this whole thing happened. And they kept it all on film. It happens. You need to be aware of that. So if we know that from our standpoint, we had X, Y, and Z personnel there, we know the subcontractor had these people there, what have you, protect and preserve that information. Now, if you can also do even a very rough sketch or outline, Joe was here, and Fred's here, and Mary's here, and that's great too. But at a minimum, know who's there. And our people, our subs, they should have that kind of information available as quickly as possible after the incident. If there are hazard analysis forms that have been done, you want to secure those immediately after an incident occurs. They, like other things, 1 can disappear, 2 can be changed, and look differently 2 days later versus what they might have shown the day of the accident. If we're talking about working around live utilities, was that identified as a hazard? And if so, was there a plan for dealing with it? It could show up on that report 3 days later if you don't have the report that was in place that morning. Getting the analysis reports as to what's being planned sooner as opposed to later. We had an incident involving I'm going to call it kind of a tower crane accident, and this was a 2-tier or 2 tower crane set up with a bridge in the middle. And the whole concept was basically having to chain the bridge to either side of the support. And the idea was that chaining the bridge in place is part of the setup. And one of the issues that was identified as an inspection issue for the crane. Well, this particular morning, they loaded materials and manpower on this crane. They raised it up. I think it was up 5 stories. They were actually doing roofing work. And they'd been on and off the crane all morning long. And I think it was 4 of the guys get on the crane. They're going to come down for lunch. Well, as the crane is coming down, you got movement back and forth with this bridge. And the fact that we find out later the bridge was never secured. At some point there, the bridge shifted and tipped. We had 4 guys come down with the bridge. Fortunately, nobody was killed. But when that crane went up that morning, had the same thing happen. You had all of the materials that was on the bridge, along with, I think, a dozen people in total. If it had come down then, with all the excess materials on there, odds are somebody would have been killed. Somebody asked for the hazardous analysis reports, the inspection reports, right after it happened. Never done. Had they been done, someone would have seen that someone didn't hook the chains up. that crane would have never gone up in the first place. So again, having a process, having a procedure, and seeing that it's done, verifying it was done, avoid these issues in the future. So look for that. Again, securing, preserving evidence, photos, videos, drawings, diagrams. Start compiling a report that's going to be made after the fact too. Today, a lot of environmental factors come into play. Materials that we have on a job site, whether something's been damaged, whether something's been leaked, something's been spilled, that leads to another issue of concern and investigation we have to handle. There are different authorities that we need to contact, different insurance coverages we need to contact. So again, when something like that happens, phone call, we can get things started. Local news reports, again, these are very aggressive individuals. They are going, well, the public has a right, the public has a need, the public should know. Well, yes, indeed. But at the same time, you don't need to have it on a job site. Once we shut that gate, if necessary, if police show up, we can utilize the police to keep them across the street, keep them out of the line of fire, to keep them out of the way of emergency personnel getting in and out. And depending on where you are, an area like this in Phoenix, they're going to be there very quickly. Get into a more rural location, it's going to take them a little bit longer to get there. But in today's world with helicopters and everything else, and more importantly, the ability of people to sit there and shoot video with their cell phones and, pass it on to others. It's more of an issue today than it was in the past, but again, bottom line is, we don't have to have these people on site. Equipment that may be out there, if it's involved in the accident, number one, secure the equipment, lock it up, keep it to the side. If it's equipment that should have inspection reports, we need to start securing those reports. Secure those reports for the last 12 months even. We had an incident on a project, and it was a front-end loader. And basically, there was a company policy, you do not get off of a piece of equipment and leave it running. Number one, the guy got off the equipment, it was still running. Number two, front-end loader, he gets off the equipment, he didn't lower the bucket. If he'd lowered the bucket, even with it running, it's not going to go anywhere. Bucket's still in the air. He gets off, it's still running, bucket's in the air. On a slight grade near an excavation site. And his story was, well, I pulled the emergency brake. Well, front-end loader rolled into the excavation, crushed 2 employees, killed 1, serious injury to the second one. And what did we find out later on? Number one, was no inspection report on that equipment that morning. Number two, the last inspection report done on that equipment was done 12 months earlier. Number three, that last inspection report 12 months earlier, what was on that? Problem with the brake cable. When you actually just stood and looked at the front-end loader, you could see this cable dangling underneath. Wasn't even attached. Not only a problem, it wasn't even attached. So that had been identified 12 months earlier. Nothing had been done. The reason there had not been subsequent reports provided on that piece of equipment, it had been on the same project with the same crew for 12 months. Well, the guys were complaining it took too much time. Why should we have to do this? Well, 1 death, 1 serious injury, both of which were easily preventable if he had just followed company policy, turned the equipment off, lower the bucket, nothing would have happened. But beyond following company policy, they had a process, they had a procedure, they had a program, they hadn't followed for 12 months. And the last time it was done, it identified the problem that led to the accident, led to the death, led to the injury. So again, it may sound like you're beating the same drum over and over and over with your guys, but these things happen. One of the major concerns we've got at ACIG right now, we have done an outstanding job over the last 8 or 9 years of reducing our overall frequency of events. And when we talk about frequency, we're talking about on the workers' compensation side and liability side, accidents and losses exceeding $5,000. We've done a great job of reducing those numbers. I mean, that, you look at the graphing on that, and it's just almost like it's falling off the cliff. It's wonderful. But our severity is still up. We have not been able to get to a point, either with our own personnel or our subcontractor personnel, of going 12 months without killing somebody. This calendar year alone, I think we've got 4 fatalities. Subcontractors, but still, it's on our projects. So things to keep in mind. We've got to get to the point, we are quality contractors. We hold ourselves out to be quality contractors. We are a quality program for quality contractors. But our severity is too high. We're still killing people. We're still seriously injuring people. Debris, again, whatever debris is out there, if we protected the area, if we protect the scene, we can gather that debris later with experts. A case we're looking at right now involving a fatality and an explosion issue, our expert was able to go and actually gather the materials that were in the excavation, and we can use that to determine exactly how thick this concrete was that the gentleman managed to go through with a jackhammer and hit a live electrical line just by backtracking and reconfiguring the debris that was there. There are people who do that. It's like a jigsaw puzzle, but there are people who specialize in doing those things. So again, if we protected and secured the area, we can have the appropriate people come in and handle that. Again, police, fire, EMS reports, they file reports. I mean, you put the person in the back of the ambulance and he's on his way to the hospital. Once the paramedics get him discharged to the hospital, then they're going to go back and they're going to do a report over what they saw, what they did, everything else. Once they got to the scene, once they got the guy up, once they got him in the ambulance, once they got him to the emergency room, and before they turned him over to hospital personnel, they're going to document. They'll be documenting information about what the guy said and stuff like that in the ambulance. We will get those reports. So again, these are all things that go into the ultimate investigation in terms of deciding what happened. Project plans and progress photos. Do y'all use any kind of live feed cameras and everything on your projects during the course of construction, things like that?
Depends on what the owner wants.
Okay. Even if the owner doesn't want that, do you periodically take photos? Here's where we are today, here's where we are tomorrow, here's where we are next week type of thing. Okay, you've got to make sure that that information is secured, that information is available. It impacts all of our contractors, maybe not as much on our industrial maintenance guys because the owner's not going to let a camera come in there anyway. But general building sites, street and road sites in particular, if we can go back and secure information about what it looked like on such and such a date, a week earlier, 2 weeks earlier, a year earlier. This case we litigated in New York, and we had progress photos showing ladders in that excavation. Jury would have had a very hard time saying, hey, there were no ladders there. Without having that kind of information, it's difficult. Now, particularly with any of our contractors who may be working in a city-type environment today, there's lots of potential video-type evidence that's available we can get to, depending on whether it's a continuous loop or whether it's staged and whatever during the course of the day, a night, or whatever. So again, there's other information we can get to many times to help support what's happened. But again, if you've got progress photos, just make sure those are maintained in some manner. We can extract them later on if we're trying to prove what was in place at a particular time and point. So obviously a lot of these should be date stamped and all from the cameras that are taking them, but more importantly, as far as your project files, your project records, if those go in there, again, something we can go back to later if we need to review and protect. Plans, you come in, you've got a set of plans to work from. And we run into this a lot with construction defect issues in particular. But if you're working off a set of plans, and there's been a discussion about a change order,
and your guys in the field make the decision to go ahead and modify what was originally drawn up, and if we don't go through the appropriate steps to get that clarified and confirmed and signed off on by the appropriate parties, and something goes wrong later on, guess what? In front of the jury, what they see is what the original plans and specs were. Regardless of how much testimony we go, well, you know, Joe agreed to this and Jim agreed to that, whatever the case may be. If it's not documented, if it's not signed off, we're going to live with what those original plans and specs were. And if what caused the accident, in the case of construction defect, what caused the problem with the building is arising from a change that was made, we basically shot ourselves in the foot. So again, changes will be made, value engineering issues will be made, but getting them signed off on, getting them committed, getting them documented is very, very important. You know, if it's not in writing, it never happened. And that's just something, it's a tough lesson to learn, but it's not in writing, it never happened. And we're stuck with the original plan and specs. Written versus recorded interviews or statements, timing, and depending on who's doing the statements. When I first started in this business in 1973, all we did were written statements. We didn't have recording equipment. But again, in today's market, most of your smartphones have the ability to record, something like that. You can use that. It's very convenient to use that to record an interview, record information. It's actually better in most cases. You can just, even if just on something, a quote, notebook, paper, whatever, have the individual write it down in his own words, in his own terminology. And the fact that we, in many cases, are going to have individuals who may not speak or write English very well, write it in their native language, whatever it is, so long as we can get someone to interpret it later on, that works out too. But again, we're just looking for objective information. The sooner we get it, the better it's probably going to be. I mean, memories start to fade after several days, certainly after weeks or months. The sooner we can document something, the better off we are. If you're going to be involved in interviewing individuals, keep them separated. If you got 5 guys who have some information about an incident, we want to keep them as best we can separated out and talk to each one individually. That's what we'll be doing when we show up on the job site. That's what OSHA does when they show up on the job site. Again, if we don't allow these guys to get together and come up with a common story, a common theme, yeah, we want to know exactly what each one saw. And chances are they're all not going to agree. Okay. As far as the statement guide goes, basically who, what, when, where, how, and why. I mean, those are the kinds of issues you're trying to get from these individuals. And I mean, there are formalized guides that adjusters use, and if you've ever had the pleasure of giving a recorded statement or something to an adjuster after an auto accident, they're going through, I mean, yeah, your name, your address, and, you know, in addition to the who, what, when, where, how, and why, you know, what is your name, what is your address, what's a good phone number we can reach you at, and oh, by the way, if I need to find you 5 years from now, who probably would know where you are 5 years from now if you aren't here? So mom, dad, boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever, if we can come up with another name, another phone number, of someone who may be available to reach him. Many, many times, we're talking to these people multiple years after the fact. And people do tend to disappear on us. And you know, we like to be able to catch them if we need them later. Looking at photographs, this is actually from a honest to goodness accident. Any guesses what that could be? It's actually in that box of debris that was gathered up after the accident. And where it came from, actually, we'll show you a picture of the plug itself. When the accident occurred, they were actually welding, doing the final welding on this flange on the back of that pipe. Our expert was able to piece it all back together. That's what it looks like. It's a plug. what they had done basically was put that plug back into the pipe, and the idea behind that plug back in the pipe was if there was any residue, debris, fumes, or whatever, it would capture them behind the plug. This pipe you see here was actually attached to the center of the plug, and there was a vent hose off the pipe that extended out over a berm about 25 or 30 yards away. So the idea was, we've got the plug in there, we're doing the final welding around the edge, and if there happen to be any fumes emitting from that, they go through the vent hose some distance away, as opposed to being right there where the guy's welding. And this case was litigated, and what was kind of revealing, and unfortunately the jury didn't buy the argument, the vent hose itself clipped on the end of that pipe. And it took some pretty good effort to clip it on, and you just couldn't pull it off. The vent hose was laying under the decedent who was welding, who was standing right in front of that plug. And the vent hose was on the ground under him when it blew out. So there's pretty obvious inference that the hose wasn't attached. Without the hose being attached, you had fumes coming out. And with fumes coming out and the lighted torch going around the flange, something got ignited and it blew. Gentleman right in front of it was killed. Co-worker who was passing the welding rods to him was sort of standing with his back to it. He suffered some significant injuries. Another co-worker, some distance away, also some significant injuries. Court even ruled that the decedent's two brothers, who were 250 yards away, had viable claims because of hearing that their brother had just been killed. And then, believe it or not, there was another tank. This was inside a tank farm. There was another tank about 25 feet away, and 4 employees on the backside of that tank claimed they heard the explosion, and as a result of that, they were injured. So, but at any rate, that case was litigated, and it's on appeal at this point, and the verdict for all of the individuals working at or near and the brothers who were involved was $22 million. We just settled the case for the other 4 employees on the backside of the other tank for $15,000. I mean, nuisance value to get rid of it, basically, because it was going to cost us $50,000 to defend that case. But, so again, you go back and you know what was going on. You start gathering the pieces, so you get an up-close shot of that and up-close shot of where it was, and you see where it came from, and then you start piecing it back together. So kind of like a jigsaw puzzle. And that particular piece stood about this tall. And watching the attorneys, carting it around in front of the jury, it was pretty heavy too. But their whole contention was that in spite of the pipe, in spite of the vent hose and everything else, that it was leaking around the edge, and that's where the material came from. So again, when you're doing the photographs, overview and close-ups, something to scale it. If you're looking at an issue, if you use a Coke can setting next to something, that gives you an idea of how big or how small based on the size of the Coke can. We know a year from now, 20 years from now, Coke can is going to be pretty much the same thing. So from a scaling standpoint, something as basic as that, yeah, a ruler, a yardstick, measuring tape, that's great too. But you might have access to a Coke can real quick. Put your hands on that. So just something that will give you some scale there. Again, go back to the train accident years ago. all the rolls of film that were shot, well, today with digital imaging and the quality of what you can even get with a cell phone, a camera. I mean, you can shoot 100 photographs, you can shoot 500 photographs, and we can weed through those after the fact. So we shouldn't be short of photographs. Again, if we're going to use photographs, we need to know who took them, if it's a video, who took it, you know, when it was done, location and orientation, you know, what does it show? I mean, you take that shot, what can you write down on a document that accompanies the picture to identify what you thought you were shooting? Even if it turns out later that someone's going to challenge what you thought it was, again, what did you think you had there to start with? And again, using the idea that if you're trying to photograph evidence on a vehicle as a good example, yeah, that close-up shot of the door is great, but back away, another shot here, but more importantly, get that angled shot of the whole right side, the whole left side, same thing from the rear. That gives you a very good image of what you're dealing with. And so that's what you're looking for there. We've got an opportunity here to sort of do a little exercise and you know, trying to make some determination of what happens in terms of an accident. You know, one of the issues when you're interviewing, build some rapport with the person. I mean, it does not have to be all lovey-dovey and hugging and all this kind of stuff. Again, build some rapport. I'm asking a question. I'm trying to come to a conclusion. What went on? You know, do unto others you'd want them to do unto you. I mean, you want them to be candid and honest and open with you. You need to have the same reaction to them. You're interviewing. You're not interrogating. We're not putting a big bright light over somebody. You know, someone's not going to walk in with a rubber hose to beat them. They'll give you the right answer. You know, we're trying to get the objective information. Get as much information as we can. Some people clam up pretty quickly. As they talk, without interrupting every time they're saying something, let them tell you something, and if you're not really sure, have to clarify it. You know, if you're talking about talking to an individual and they're talking about a speeding vehicle, for example, well, he was driving like a bat out of hell. Well, what's that mean? Well, if you were driving at the time and this guy passed you, how fast were you going? If you were doing 55 and he went by you and you're leaving you in the dust, I mean, you may not know whether he's doing 70 or 75 or 80 or whatever. You know he's going faster than you're going. So maybe part of that is, well, how fast were you going? That's going to give you a little clarity as to what that bat out of the hell really means there, and just try to narrow it down. We don't necessarily need to know the specifics of how fast the other guy was going, but, you know, let's clarify what bat out of the hell really means, type of thing. Again, depending on what you're dealing with, rough diagrams, any kind of sketch, a picture, whatever that you and or the individual can put together, it just clarifies what you're talking about. Again, being objective. You know, you're going to listen, you're not judging, you're not passing sentence on the individual. Let them tell you what they saw. Don't interrupt them. You know, wait for an appropriate time, and you can always jump in to ask some initial questions. Whatever they're telling you is probably going to lead you to look at some other questions and issues you'd like to clarify too. So let's look at that. You know, if we're talking about individual reports work at 8 o'clock, complains of pain in his left knee, states he slipped on wet concrete the day before at approximately 11:30. He's going to be interviewed by a supervisor and as well as an eyewitness. What are we going to do with that? Joan, interview here.
Okay.
Let's talk about that.
Okay. Right now?
Yeah.
So, I heard that you're reporting that your knee is injured. What happened? Can you tell me what happened?
I was walking down the sidewalk and stepped on a wet area and slipped my right leg, slipped out from underneath me and twisted my knee.
Did anyone see you do that, or was anyone with you when that happened?
Jose was walking behind me. I think he saw me whenever I twisted it. Never did really talk to him, but.
Did you report it to anyone else, or?
No, I
your
didn't. So
Supervisor?
I thought everything was okay.
Oh, okay, and it's still bothering you today? or-
Yes.
Tell me where the pain is at. What's going on?
On the right side of my knee. Like a ligament or something.
Something? Is it better when your leg is raised and you're off your knee, or
A little bit.
a little bit? Okay.
Mostly whenever I'm walking upright, so that's more aggravating.
So at this point in time, what would you like to do?
I'd
Report
like to
it
go
as,
see a doctor and have it checked out.
okay. Well, that means we'll have to file a workers' comp claim.
Okay.
Do that. Get you checked out.
Is that all you need to know?
Well, that's not all I need to know. Now that we're gonna file the workers' comp claim, we need to fill out some forms, so I get out our form and start asking him the questions, when it happened, how it happened, and get all the details completed, file the claim.
Do we think that went pretty well in terms of Joe's questions and the answers that were given?
Do you have to file a workers' comp claim right away, or can you send to a doctor to have it evaluated?
If we're going to a doctor, my recommendation would be we file a claim. And,
We still need to file our paperwork, yeah.
I mean, by getting the claim filed, what that's going to do is a couple things. Number one, it's going to, at a minimum, set up the obligation to pay the doctor that you go to. It's also going to bring the work comp adjuster into the process for additional questioning, additional investigation, additional information to and from the doctor. And again, I think it removes the employer out of the line of fire, and if there needs to be a quote bad guy, if it's something that we may end up having to deny or resist later, we're still going to guarantee that initial payment to the doctor. But if there's an issue of challenging or denying something later, it's the work comp adjuster doing that, not Joan, not Kitchell, not the employer, not you as the project manager, whatever.
Kind of, what do I do on all my safety orientation on a job? I tell everyone has to go through the safety orientation. And I tell it in every one of them, if something happens to you, if I'm working and I lift something up, I know I may have tweaked my back. Feels pretty good then.
Mm-hmm.
It may not feel good the next morning, because I've been there. You need to tell your foreman or come and tell me it happened. If you come back and tell me the next day or the following day, as far as I'm concerned, it didn't happen.
Right.
You need to tell someone on the job, either for their foreman to put it in a daily report or come and tell me specific, or it's not going to be recognized as an incident the following day.
Now, realistically, that is kind of like, in many cases, taking a release from an individual for settlement, stuff like that. It may not be worth the paper it's written on. And trying to plant that seed, which is a good seed to plant, because we want them to report timely as opposed to reporting later. That doesn't necessarily get us out of a claim down the road, even if they come back, a day later, a week later, a month later. But again, I like the idea of trying to set that stage on the front end. And again, too, when you're looking at a CLIP program for Kitchell, that's a great tool to use with the subcontractors to, again, encourage that early reporting as opposed to later reporting. Because, again, the sooner we know something, the sooner we can verify it, the sooner we can clarify it, and stuff like that. So, what didn't go well in that, some of the unanswered questions, again, obviously, we would probably go into more detail as that thing moved through the paper process, but okay, you slipped on something wet. What do you think you slipped on? Exactly where was it? And was this something that was wet? Was it on the project site itself? And what day of the week are we talking about, for example? Is it possible that you slid in 7 days on Saturday night, here it is Monday morning type of thing? So again, you start probing as things are said and what additional information. And with some of that too, you're going to run into people that may clam up, people who may not want to answer, may not want to open up on those kinds of issues. Which again, is good information to have later when we report the claim to the adjuster. By the way, we tried to interview Joe and this is what he was telling us.
this is what he didn't seem willing to tell us type of thing, and it gives us an opportunity to probe into it in more detail. And that additional detailed probing ends up being done by the work comp adjuster as opposed to the employer, which again, takes you guys out of the line of fire and make things work a little bit easier there. But the bottom line is, get with the individuals, start talking to the individuals, and let's see where it goes from there. Okay. Don't be afraid to ask questions. I mean, my wife gets angry at me. She will not go with me to buy a car, for example. I have been known to show up at a dealership at 3 or 4 in the afternoon and finally cut a deal at 10:30 at night. You know, I'm going to run the salesman through all of his hoops. I'm going to run his manager through all of his hoops. And oh, by the way, when I finally get to the finance guy, we're going to have more discussions. I love it. My wife hates it. So again, you don't need to be that probing necessarily, or maybe that confrontational. But again, don't be afraid to ask questions. And if you feel you're not comfortable to be the one asking those questions, again, when you go back to your projects tomorrow, start looking for who are my people out there that can have these discussions. And when you start talking about lower level personnel on site, there may be this void between upper management and lower people. You need somebody maybe in the middle there that can ask those questions too. Again, that gets back to some of the cultural issues. You know, what the Hispanics do is one thing, what the blacks do is one thing, what the whites do is one thing, and just how do you communicate across cultural lines like that too. Okay. Again, the objective with photos is documenting the conditions seen, location of evidence, provide context and reference points. Even in terms of uncollectible evidence. Now, again, skid marks and things like that are probably more tied to an auto type accident, which is going to be a rarity maybe for you guys. But scorch marks, depending on what's happening on your job site, an incident we're talking about here in a few minutes, and involves an electrocution, and there's some scorch marks involved in what happened to this young man and how he got electrocuted. And the nature of the scorch marks offers a lot of information that we're still probing into as well. Picture's worth 1,000 words, and in many cases that's true. But 1,000 pictures that really don't tell the story aren't worth anything. Again, my case in New York, had we had pictures of that ladder or ladders in that excavation, would have been great. We didn't have it. You know, once you take photos, and again, a professional photographer is probably better adept at this than we would be, but if something isn't as clear in that first photo, retake it. And again, sometimes, depending on your camera, if you're trying to do the close-up, it's going to be somewhat blurry, so you need to back away and get a wider angle of what you're trying to get there as well. And again, document what they're telling us as well. We could use a situation like this in terms of he slipped on an unknown substance while walking up a set of stairs to the second floor of the project. Again, talking about the scenario, taking photographs of the scenario. We've got a new case recently filed in Chicago that oddly enough dates back about 3 years ago in the wintertime. And the allegation is that a parking garage that we built 5 to 7 years ago, well, they're showing us a picture of one corner of the parking garage. It's wintertime, it's icing and snowing outside. You've got like probably a 42-inch wall, and then it's open above the wall in the parking garage. Well, they're saying, well, the slope was wrong on the floor of the garage, so it allowed accumulation of ice and snow, and the guy allegedly got out of his car, slipped and fell. It's a liability case. But guys, you're in Chicago. It's February, and you're in the far corner of this parking garage, and there's an open wall above where you're parking. What do you expect to find other than ice and snow that's going to come in?
I think we can defend that case successfully. But again, those are the slope had to be, what's the slope have to do with anything of ice and snow accumulating when it's blowing in over the wall to start with? It's not gonna melt and go back out. It's cold outside. So again, these are the allegations, and looking at these photographs, you've got something to start with. And pretty good photographs in terms of what they're telling us. We know where it's at and that kind of thing. We can at least go out today and challenge the slope issue by putting a level on top of it and see which way it moves. Which raises an issue in many of our construction defect claims. I'm assuming that in y'all's regular toolkits, levels are pretty common. But the number of construction defect claims we get into involving balconies or other structures outside the main building where they're talking water intrusion into the building, and when you finally set a level on it, lo and behold, as opposed to angling out, it is angling in. Not sure how that happens. But this is another issue of getting out of the trailer, making sure of what's going on, whether it's our people doing the concrete work, whether it's a sub doing the concrete work. Are they doing something to inspect and validate and verify what they're putting in place? It's a whole lot easier to catch it during the construction stage and correct it as opposed to coming in 5 years later and suddenly we've got this 42-story building and balconies at every level. And how do you go in and correct it then? Very expensive. And if we were living, whether you're talking about a condominium, and I don't think y'all do much residential from the terms of high-rise type stuff, but whether you're talking about a condominium set up in that scenario or you're talking about some kind of an office building, and you've got water managing to flow back into the structure, if you live there, if you work there, you don't like it, and you want it fixed. And these are things that we need to be able to identify on the front end from a quality standpoint that we are doing the appropriate things to correct it before it goes in. Do y'all routinely do mock-ups?
Yes.
Okay. If it works in the mock-up, it needs to work in the building too. If it's routine to do a mock-up, then let's do the mock-ups. We've got we just settled a case this week actually, and fortunately the subcontractor's paying the freight on it. But it was a hospital facility. It was the flooring in the MRI and CT scan rooms. And they have all the specific flooring issues and the lead line and all this other stuff. And long story short, the flooring was cracking. Well, they had done mock-ups on everything else in this facility, but they didn't do a mock-up on the flooring. And what they determined to be the problem of the cracking, had they done a mock-up, they probably would have determined that before the flooring went in and avoided the whole issue. That's about just under $1 million problem. Again, fortunately, sub and his carrier is taking care of it. But it's been about a 18-month process of identifying the problem, making the repairs, putting it in place. Certainly had the potential of impacting the business relationship between the medical facility and our contractor. And again, even with the sub taking care of it, it's been this long drawn-out affair. Had they done a mock-up early on, you would avoid this whole thing. And the cost of the mock-up against the cost of repair would be, peanuts. So again, those are the kinds of things we're looking for. Anytime that we're looking at an accident investigation, do a postmortem. Gather up in a room like this. Everybody needs to be involved. Let's talk about what'd you find, what'd you miss. Even in terms of additional investigation at that point. And again, a lot of times this is going to be done within days or certainly a week of the incident. But, multiple sets of eyes, ears, and heads are far better than one. Nobody knows it all. So, and the other thing I encourage people on, there's not a stupid question out there. If you don't know, if you've got a question, go ahead and lay it on the table. I mean, I would be more concerned about the person that, challenges you for raising an issue as opposed to not raising the issue in the first place. So there's not a stupid question out there. Josh wanted to talk a little bit about root cause and using one of the recent cases we've got, and something y'all can relate to. We've got an electrocution. We've got an apprentice electrician, subcontractor employee. This is a manufacturing facility they're building. And what they were prepared to do that morning was wire up the overhead lighting. So the light panels had already been set in place. They had the wire whips tied up above the panels. And so the hazard analysis evaluation that morning, they all gathered right under the site of the accident and went through what the process was, went through the fact that we've got live power up here, what are we going to do about it? And so all that's very, very nicely documented. And within 45 minutes of going through that whole process, this young man, apprentice electrician, about 27 years old, is dead, electrocuted. So based on those facts and trying to get to some causation and root cause analysis, what kind of questions would you be asking? Grace?
Well, I would be asking lockout, tagout questions. I see it a lot in construction that the foreman is dependent on for the lockout, tagout. There may be several people working on the electrical. And I believe what OSHA wants is each and every person that has potential exposure to the light electrical has their own lockout, tagout device. You have a group lockout, tagout. Ideally, in general industry, that's what's expected. I think it might be a little different in construction, but it shouldn't be. I'd be asking lockout, tagout.
Following proper procedures, did he have a backup? Did he have someone working with him? The area was he working, was it secure? As far as, did he have maybe his backup, if he's going to work on hot wires, he has something goes wrong, the guy can pull him out? Or do you follow all his safety procedures and look at his game plan for the day or what he's doing in that activity?
Okay. Give you a few more facts. Apprentice electrician. He's going to use a scissor lift to get to the work area. So he's going to be, at some point there, he's going to be 25, 30 feet up in the air. He is working with his foreman. And the electrical panel box is an aggressive 6-minute walk from the site area. So facts are, foreman says, I'm going to go de-energize the line. Mr. Apprentice, you wait here and you get ready, and when I come back from de-energizing the line, we are going to go up together on the lift, and I will confirm that the line has been de-energized. Does that sound like a reasonable procedure?
Are there any other witnesses?
Well, we have there's actually a third employee who, after they did the analysis of what they're going to do that morning, he had a separate task. So he's moved down probably 30 to 40 feet away, and he's on a different lift doing some other work that he had been working the day before. And then there is yet another subcontractor employee actually laying in additional acoustical ceiling tiles, pretty much adjacent, but separate contractor, separate work.
Job hazard analysis, did he actually mention those things in his job hazard analysis, that that's what he's going to do? He's going to make sure that it's de-energized and not going to work until it's de-energized? Do you have that in writing, or was it just hearsay?
Right now, that's hearsay. Now, the hazard analysis did acknowledge that we have live electrical, and the electrical will be de-energized before we get to it. But as far as the ongoing discussion of, I'm the foreman, I'm gonna go de-energize, I'm going to come back here, I will get in the lift with you, we will go up together, I will test the line, and once we've acknowledged that it's de-energized, then we will start working. Now, the other side of it too, and y'all may be very familiar with this, the nature of the lighting that they were putting in, the electric whips were basically tied up. This is the flexible cable line up there. It was already pre-stripped. So at the end of the day, what they're going to do, once it's de-energized, they basically just had to plug it in. And then once they felt it was secured and in the top or back of the light fixture, go back to the switch, everything should be on. So there would be no need at that point to go in and do any wire stripping or anything else. But now, move forward, foreman goes, this was an electrical panel box with 2 locks on the box. Foreman, we are told, is the qualified person on site. He's got the key to the box. He unlocks the box. He opens the box. According to the wiring plan, breaker 5 controlled the lights. He throws breaker 5 and he tapes it, shuts the box, locks the box, starts back to the work area. While he's in the process of doing all of this, apprentice electrician has already gotten on the scissor lift. He's raised it 25 or 30 feet in the air. This is where it gets a little fuzzy. We're not sure what he was doing or what he was planning to do. But we have a set of cotton work gloves laying on the lift. We have a wire stripping tool in the glove. We have a piece of copper wiring in the stripping tool, and we have a scorch mark across the glove. Foreman gets back to the site. All of this has transpired in his 6-minute walk back. Co-employee has managed to lower his lift, go over and from the floor bring down the apprentice lift, and by that time they're starting CPR and other methods, and of course odds are he was dead when he hit the floor of the lift.
Does anyone check cell phone records to see if they were in communication?
Problem in this particular facility, the nature of the facility, cell phones did not function, did not work.
So it wouldn't be that he
No,
said, go ahead, try it.
not like radio contact from here to here. What we believe we've determined in terms of the lockout tagout thing, we're not overly crazy about the lockout tagout in terms of unlocking the panel box, opening the panel box, throwing the breaker, and taping it up and shutting everything back up. But what we believe we've determined is he was locking and tagging out for himself, the foreman, and the fact that he was going to come back, he was going to validate, he was going to check to see whether the line was de-energized. That was his process, and the fact that, again, according to the foreman, his protocol was, as an apprentice, you don't have the authority or responsibility for checking that line until I confirm. And once I confirm, then you can, drop the wires in. So from that standpoint, it's still a little gray, but it concerns me that if this is your protocol, how come it wasn't followed in terms of the young man staying on the floor and waiting for your return, or had he done this before and just happened to make a mistake here because the line was still live?
And what's interesting, why was the line still live? Whoa. The wiring diagram indicated.
Beautiful.
Please mute your phone.
Somebody just went to sleep at the wheel on us. The wiring diagram indicated breaker 5. And further inspection after the accident, we learned that the line that he was going to work on was actually breaker 15. Further inspection, the next day, we had an electrical engineer on site to work with the subcontractor to go in and try to backtrack this thing to figure out what had happened. And in the junction box, somebody had crossed the line over. They were, correct that and got it back to breaker 5 as opposed to breaker 15. And, but, I mean, those are all factors leading up to what happened. Do we still know what happened? No. We're still looking for some real root cause. Interesting discussion Sunday afternoon. The only time we could make our expert available for a conference call. His observations when he was at the project site on that Saturday, working with the electrical subcontractor to determine why 5 was 15 or 15 was 5, and further determine what may have happened, were his observations about the subcontracting employees on that Saturday as they're working through the process. As project managers and superintendents, are y'all aware of what kind of PPO protection, the PPE protection the electrical subcontractor should be utilizing, should be wearing?
It depends on what voltage you're messing with and so forth, what level you wear.
And I think this is 277, does that make sense?
Yeah, you'd probably have to be above that to really, but it still boils down to the fact, it don't matter if you've thrown a breaker or not, you check it for voltage.
You gotta
before
test it.
touch it.
Well,
And that's where,
So their
We're having
procedure
trouble.
said an apprentice can't test?
well, that's according to the foreman, no. And of course, again, according to the foreman, if he's going to lock out and tag out for himself, he's going to test and verify for himself and not put the apprentice at risk. That's his story. That's his protocol. That's what he's living with right now.
Was this an existing structure, an existing building that they were remodeling, or?
No, this was an addition. This was a new addition to an existing structure.
The other worker on the other scissor lift, who did his lockout?
Well, he wasn't doing electrical work. Now, where I was leading up to in terms of the protective devices to be worn, according to our expert on site that Saturday, his terminology is that the cotton glove that we found on the lift should have been worn under a rubber glove with some kind of a leather type glove on top of it. And the cotton glove primarily for comfort, depending on the weather conditions, cold, heat, humidity, whatever. The rubberized glove for the actual protection, and then the leather for electrical flash, shock, or whatever. But he said the interesting thing to him was that all of the electrical subs on site that day had the rubber and leather reversed, which in his estimation, they were losing the benefit of the protection that the rubber should provide to them.
yeah, that should be.
So I guess from a management standpoint on the site, if you observed, I mean, would you be concerned if you observed that same type of thing yourself?
Yes,
Or know that that is a problem, that the reverse order of the gloving?
right, but me personally, I mean, it sounds like the work he was doing, if the line was de-energized, he wouldn't need any of that.
Right.
To begin with. Normally, we enlist that if we're close to hot work.
Right.
We don't work on hot work as a company policy, but there's still, if you're working near some hot work, you're required to wear that because of the flash arc and so forth.
And in what, again, according to our electrical engineer, if you go in, you
you test, you verify, you validate that the line's been de-energized. Once you know it's de-energized, take everything off, and you can sit there and plug your wires in. The fact that these whips were already pre-stripped, there was no need to cut the wiring or anything else.
Right.
And what we suspect at this juncture is that this young man was up there without the necessary protective devices. Again, the fact that there had been this crossover and the mislabeling, basically, of the two breakers would have been determined had someone tested. There, oddly enough, as an apprentice electrician, there's no indication of the photographs and all we have of his tool belt and other equipment that he even had a tester in his equipment. And I would assume that even as an apprentice electrician,
Yes.
that's a $3 or $4 item at a
You
minimum.
would still check it.
And
Unfortunately, the breakers being labeled wrong, that's real common.
yeah,
That's why you have to check it.
which again, once you test it, light goes on, wait a minute, timeout, we gotta go back and start our process. Yeah, we would have never learned, we would have never known that there was a reversal had they tested, had they found out that there was something not right here. The subcontractor would have probably, I'm gonna assume, probably would have never told us, got a problem here. They would have gone and just fixed it. And here, after the fact, we're looking at all these issues, and these are all gonna be issues that will impact this case as it goes through the legal process.
Have you examined the training documentation for the deceased worker and the other workers?
Information we will be gathering.
Because
Yeah.
if they're wearing their gloves wrong, that's another indication that their training is whack.
Well, what's interesting with this particular subcontractor is it's, one, a strong relationship between them and our contractor. Number two, it's a 90-year-old company, and reportedly never having a significant incident, which, hearing all of this, that they've been very lucky for 90 years, if indeed they've been, cutting corners in terms of how they do things throughout the process. Even if they were using the appropriate gloves and everything else, now you run into the question, looking back at training records and stuff like that, what are they doing to ensure that their protective gear is adequate for what they're doing? I understand after all of this, there are certain ways to test, like the rubber gloving. There are ways to test to make sure there's no nicks, there's no holes and what have you. Well, if they, one, are reversing the gloving process, or they even going to the step of testing it, so you could have a guy up there, even with all the appropriate stuff, and even if it's in the right order, if it's not right, if there's a problem with those rubber gloves, he still may not be protected. And,
But like I said, I run into that a lot on construction projects. The foreman does the lockout, tagout, and several people are working under that lock, which is
oddly enough,
at risk.
the afternoon I was up there, we talked about, well, in terms of the lockout, tagout, you got the apprentice, you got the foreman, should they both not have gone up there together? And in terms of physically using a lock or whatever, that would have been the appropriate way
I
of
could have
both
had
of them
my
do it.
own piece of duct tape
Yes.
that I put over that.
Which again, our expert was not impressed with the taping process. He said, there are other options, even if it's not a physical lock, there are other options in terms of, he's talking about plastic clasp or whatever that would ensure that this thing is over. And so then you lock it, and then, oh, by the way, then you actually put a notice on the outside of the box, this has been locked up, this has been tagged, whatever, just to forewarn somebody that comes along later.
Yeah, with tape, facilities or maintenance could come through there and lock it, throw the breaker on.
Exactly.
So it's.
Or for that matter, you tape it up, and depending on the tape you're using, depending on the moisture conditions in and around the box, the tape may not hold. Another issue.
So that's not an approved method.
So again, at the end of the day, this is a concern I've got, a 90-year-old company that's been very, very lucky for 90 years. Another issue comes into play here. This is not a RAP program, so we're not directly involved on either the work comp or the liability, and hopefully we get everything passed off to the subcontractor. But you take this same scenario, put it into a CLIP program, now you're buying the responsibility for these deficiencies by that subcontractor.
No, it's no excuse, but it's something us superintendents always say. we do our best to make our job site safe. We go through training, we go through the proper protocol, but you can't eliminate the human factor. I mean, there's just that one case where that kid, well, I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna show the guy I know what I'm doing, I'll be done before he gets back. I mean, there's that little thing that you just can't prevent. You can't have a person at every point, at every time, eyes watching everything, and you just can't prevent it.
But he's dead, and so you can't get his side of the story.
Well, and again, one of the concerns I've got is that, again, going back and listening to the foreman, this is my protocol, this is my protocol, this is what I always do. The mere fact that this young man took it upon himself to jump on that lift and go up and do what he did suggests to me that he had done this before. And in spite of the protocol, okay, you got a protocol, what are you doing to enforce that protocol? What are you doing to verify that protocol has been followed in the past and is being followed in the future type of thing?
When we're doing anything like that on my jobs, I typically ask the electrician to give me a checklist. And we pretty much follow that checklist all the way down to the T. Normally I ask them to have, if there's 2 or 3 people working from point A to point B or C, that all 3 of those people have a lockout.
Right.
And they sign the piece of paper, yep, we did, okay, we checked off that, we're all 3 here, we all locked out. We go to the next step, you went over here, yep, Tom, check the voltage, make sure everything's dead. That's checked off, and then follow the line. That's just about as picture perfect as you can get.
Well, again, you're taking those additional steps, and at some point on a periodic basis, you go back and in spite of all that documentation, periodically, you're doing kind of a walkthrough, a double check, and are they really doing this stuff? Because again, you can write anything in the world. I mean, again, go back to my example of the front end loader and the emergency brake cable that had been hanging loose for a year. The last inspection report was probably the emergency brake. Nothing was done. Somewhere along the way, there was follow-up that should have been done, and more importantly, in that particular case, who had the responsibility, and it certainly was beyond the job site, who had the responsibility for gathering these walk-around inspection reports on their equipment?
I think,
and for a year hadn't done it.
Kitchell project, I believe, and I may be speaking out of place, that we require a Kitchell person to be right there with them when they do anything with the lockout tag. But it's just a time frame to verify that that's done. Then you go about your business. But not to stand there and watch the whole procedure, but just to verify that the lockout tag out verification.
Well,
has
again,
been
you know,
completed.
from y'all's standpoint, and you get down to your project supervision, your project management, and whatever, how far down the ladder you run it, if you've got those processes in place, you know, you are avoiding someone making that $500,000 decision that goes against you. And if you don't have those processes in place, I mean, there's that potential of someone making that $500,000 decision.
Just looking at what was there, I would say, if I was looking at this from the outside, I would look at this and think that our electrician, whoever it was, relied on a panel schedule only and did no investigative research to find out what circuit controlled what. I mean, we do that all the time, John, if I'm wrong here, we go into a hospital, we do a lot of hospital work. We verify those circuits to make sure we know what we're turning off, what it controls. So if I'm looking at this, I'm thinking that he relied totally on what was on a panel schedule and did no investigative research just to find out exactly what controlled what.
Mm-hmm. You know, another thing that we're looking at right now, and again with our electrical expert involved, and we've got the electrical expert hired as far as this accident goes. We've hired yet a separate electrical expert who can, independent of the accident, work with our contractor evaluating other issues, and that may be something we get him involved in as to what additional processes and procedures should that electrical sub have done, and that kind of issue may come up too. So, but you know, when you're looking at the root cause evaluation, you go in, you get all of these different issues, and certainly leading up to what happened. And too often, we get a report back from a contractor, and you know, they've looked at the root cause, and well, you know, it was lack of training. Well, yeah, lack of training is an issue, but that's not the root cause. That's might not have even been a real contributing cause to the problem. I mean, Training is always going to be a question of concern because something's gone wrong. But beyond that, where do we go next? What really caused it? Again, unfortunately, in this particular case, unless this foreman or even the code worker who was in the same immediate area goes, oh yeah, Fred had done that all the time. We know Fred had done that. Well, again, if you know that, and if you know what the protocol is, why are you not raising that issue to the appropriate people on the job site to get the appropriate corrective measures in place and stuff like that?
Well, if they have a written policy, they follow a certain procedure. I mean, they're exposing themselves anyway because they didn't follow their own written policies and procedures. So if you don't follow your own written policies and procedures, once it's written down, it's part of your policies and procedures. You don't follow it, your liability comes back.
And again, I mean, look at it from the standpoint of the foreman. I mean, he's got to live with this deal forever. I mean, this young man's dead as a result of the accident. But if he had these protocols out there, if he insisted on these protocols out there, but yet he didn't enforce them, didn't follow them, that's the problem.
Sounds eerily similar to Rick's incident last year, kind of, right? Where we were demoing a building down at ASU, electrician, small subcontractor. I think they were demoing the fire line, right? Wasn't that guy demoing the fire line? Anyway, he grabbed the wire, I think it was 277, didn't test and verified. The impact of the shock knocked him off the ladder. You got all this metals and everything on the floor, sharps. And the guy went to the doctor to get checked up, and it was really injured. I mean, that was a lot.
That was, we're doing demo, and had already demoed the lighting circuits and had temporary lights set up. Well, this is an old conduit line, no light was illuminated from it. He had a tester. It didn't work because he said he hadn't gotten to get a battery for it after we talked to him about it.
That's right.
What had happened somewhere, they did not verify and missed, a neutral had ran back through and tied into the circuit. So even though everything else was dead around it, that one circuit was still, that one conductor was still alive. But the same thing, their company said, before we cut anything, the guy's supposed to put a tester on it and verify that it's not hot. This guy's excuse was, yeah, I know I got my tester, but the battery's dead. I just haven't had time to buy one, replace the battery.
And fortunately, he walked away from it.
He was lucky.
Yeah.
He got a little gash on the back of his head, but it could have been.
Something as basic as that, as falling on debris, could have easily been impaled on who knows what. And I can think of at least two very similar incidents like this one, where we had lower level electrical people, lockout, tagout issues, and the aggressive nature of the individual. I'm going up the ladder, I'm going to do this anyway. And the end result, it's not good. Did you get too much information today? Did you get enough information today? Do you have any questions right now that we can kick around? Feel better about going back to your projects tomorrow and having discussions with your personnel?
I have a question about documentation, especially in something you think might come up later, other people may want to look at stuff. Do we have a policy about, privilege and confidential on our documents, all of them or some of them, or do you know, Josh? Joanne would probably know.
Typically, we don't give out our documentation without legal approval.
True, but if you don't stamp it in a certain way, it's discoverable. And I don't know if you know anything about that.
Well, the problem you're going to run into, and you can, privilege, confidential, anticipation litigation, any number of buzzwords like that. If litigation commences, they're going to get it. Yeah. The biggest issue there is if it's objective, if it's factual, good, bad, or otherwise. I mean, it's there. What we customarily do on a SWAT type investigation, particularly if we will almost always have counsel involved, if we need to hire an expert, hire whatever, we're hiring it through council. And in that scenario, anything that's generated, council can protect as the legal work product. But even with David here as general counsel for Kitchell, he's general counsel for Kitchell, he's not litigating the case outside of Kitchell, and odds are we would not be able to protect it from the other side. Again, that said, if it's factual, if it's objective, we got to live with it, good, bad, or otherwise. I would rather know from a claim side that there's a problem today than to find out on the courthouse steps or to find out in mediation. We had a case a number of years ago, again, a street road incident, and there was a mail service truck heading up the highway, and he either got forced over, somehow he managed to hit the end of a CTV barrier on the shoulder of the road, and not only did he have the massive collision accident, but the truck burned, the guy was killed. And the whole allegation was that the barriers were shifted over, not up to the fog line, but actually beyond the fog line into the traveling lane. That was the whole allegation. And there were actually photographs to suggest that. Our counter to that was, well, that was post-accident, that the barriers shifted after they were hit. But we literally found out a week before mediation, a month before trial, that, yeah, they were probably right that the barriers were set in the wrong place, because the metal clips that held the barriers together, there was a problem of putting the bolt through, and there was concrete residue or whatever that prevented the bolt from going through. And the guys had just made the decision not only not to put them together, but had just pitched the clips over in the grass just beyond the barriers. And that material had been found laying in the grass. And whoever found it sat on it and didn't say anything about it for almost 2 years. And so we're moving forward, defend, and then like, wait a minute, we got a problem. $2.3 million worth. So if it's bad information, we can deal with it today. It's hard to deal with it on the courthouse steps, type of thing. So I would not be all that concerned, and again, a lot of our contractors will argue this, I wouldn't be all that concerned about documenting what we know. Again, objective, factual, we can live with it. We'll make it work.
I recently read an article about how conventional wisdom is the supervision documents the accident, and how, you know, nobody likes to rat on themselves or, you know, point out their own deficiencies. And so that doesn't always work out well. I mean.
Well, see, that also gets back to the whole issue of having that from top to bottom, the culture of the relationship, that if something needs to be changed, regardless of where you stand on that ladder, you can raise your hand, ask a question, and hopefully something happens. But if you're in a culture where, you know, management doesn't want to hear and the bottom doesn't want to bring it up, be viewed as a troublemaker, then you got a problem. Because things can go wrong, things can happen. They could be preventable, corrected, whatever. But if people are, just because of those cultural differences, people are just reluctant to raise the question, we can't get to the bottom line and get things corrected. Okay. Well, if there's other questions, Josh, I'll turn it back to you.
Anybody, remote, have any questions?
Remote still with us?
I respect your guys' time. I was gonna go into a few other things. But I think I can wait until next time. Just so you know, with the KCI folks, we are currently revising our crisis management plan. I still can't figure out why we don't have one for every company, but I'll do my best to make sure we change that, because CEM should have their crisis management, of course, Kitchell Corp, HD, they need to have their own plans. But the big thing that Grace and I took away from our ACIG conference was the social media, the impact they play on anything good or bad. In this case, it's probably gonna be bad. So if we have an incident, what are we gonna do? What's our communication? What's our plan? Do we know the plan? How are we gonna communicate that plan? And who's gonna speak for us as a company? Ron had mentioned that we do have people that are media professionals that would probably speak, maybe Dan Pierce. But we're not accustomed to having anybody just go get in front of the microphone. We had Anthony Huey out there. He got in Grace's face with the microphone. Did you volunteer? I can't remember.
No, he picked me.
Picked him, the camera and the microphone right in Grace's face. And Grace did really well. You're probably one of the best, if not the best.
Well, it wasn't under any pressure as far as,
Yeah,
we hadn't had a big accident.
yeah, yeah,
But you'd also had 3 people ahead of you, you figured you knew what was coming up.
yeah.
2 Yes.
That's right, the third one followed you. Got a point.
Yeah. So it's hard to plan for the crisis. A lot of this meeting, they said the social media is the 4th highest place that people will go to look for in case in times of emergency. So the point here is even your mom, your dad, or your grandparents, even they're on the social media now, not Facebook or LinkedIn or Twitter. Twitter, I don't frequent that very often, but the fact is everybody is on social media these days. They're not just, my parents finally got a laptop about 4 years ago. They're 60s, so. But nonetheless, there's a lot of people on Facebook. So they're gonna see something bad happens, they're gonna be tweeting, they're gonna be sending messages, hey, Kitchell did this, did that. It's probably not gonna be in our favor. So in our crisis management plan, we're gonna have new steps to surround ourselves, brace that type of risk out there. So be looking for that. The changes in the OSHA record keeping that's going to go into effect January will also impact the crisis management plan. So before it was a fatality or 3 or more people in the hospital, yeah, we got to call OSHA. Now it's any amputation, any loss of eye, any one person or more going to the hospital, we have to call OSHA. So that will be also in crisis management. But yeah, social media is here to stay. It's going to be have a big impact. So we gotta embrace that, make sure we're prepared. So those are the major points that I wanted to cover. Also on our our OSHA incident, injury log incident report, in the last month I've seen 3 different forms, okay? I try to get rid of every one I can, but it down to 1. So make sure if we have an incident, we're using that one, it's on a fillable form, make sure we're all using the same form, okay? We did a trend analysis for the last 4 years. The majority of our accidents spike in March and April. And the leading cause of incidents are hand injuries. We needed to get more variables built into our incident reports, like age, time of day of week, some other ones, how much experience he has, even if it's a subcontractor. I think we need to incorporate that into our reports. That'll help identify trends going forward. So, anyway, that's what I had. Ron, thank you so much for coming on. And ACIG is a tremendous resource. If I don't know an answer, I will definitely give Ron a call or Mike Overhaul. They've been really wonderful helping us get to 0 injuries as our goal. So, any questions? All right, guys. Thanks for taking the time of your day, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Josh.
Thanks, Ron.
No problem.